The ocean has always been a keeper of secrets, its depths hiding stories the world has long forgotten. Imagine a time before continents as we know them, a place whispered of in fragments of ancient myth, hinted at in maps lost to time, and referenced in texts dismissed as legend. This was Lemuria, a land that never fully existed in the history books, yet whose traces linger like shadows beneath the waves. Its name, barely spoken aloud, evokes visions of a civilization advanced beyond comprehension, a kingdom whose people might have walked with knowledge of the stars and the earth in ways we can scarcely imagine. To some, it is merely a tale for dreamers and scholars obsessed with what cannot be proven. But there are those who claim that the echoes of Lemuria have not entirely faded, that beneath the ocean floor lie clues that could alter our understanding of human history forever. The story begins not with grand discoveries, but with whispers in old libraries and forgotten archives. Maps, crudely drawn yet impossibly precise in their placement of islands and landmasses, hint at territories that do not exist today. Cartographers of the 18th and 19th centuries pored over the seas, their instruments and compasses guiding them toward lands whose reality is still debated. In one obscure atlas, a vast continent stretches across the Indian Ocean, labeled with names that vanish in subsequent editions. The scholars who first studied these maps noted anomalies in coastlines, peculiar geological formations, and migration patterns of species that defied explanation. Some believed the maps were fanciful speculation. Others insisted they were warnings encoded by ancient civilizations, messages to guide those perceptive enough to understand. Lemuria, they said, was not merely a place but a key to understanding a forgotten epoch in which humanity might have known truths now obscured by millennia of change. Its people, according to fragmented accounts and esoteric teachings, were not ordinary mortals. They were keepers of knowledge, masters of arts and sciences that bridged the tangible and the mystical. They were said to possess abilities that modern observers might dismiss as fantasy. Deep insight into natural laws, advanced engineering, and an uncanny grasp of human consciousness. Legend spoke of architecture that harmonized with the Earth's rhythms, temples that reflected cosmic patterns, and a society where leadership and wisdom were inherited not through power alone, but through lineage. It is here that the story intersects with something more tangible, more human: the Merovingians. The Merovingians, often called the long-haired kings, ruled Gaul with a mixture of divine reverence and political authority. Their reign, stretching centuries, is recorded in history as a period of both stability and violence. But beneath the chronicles of conquest and succession lies a thread rarely acknowledged: the suggestion that their bloodline was not ordinary. Some historians have noted their unusual longevity, their distinctive traits, and their ritualized governance. Scholars of esoterica, far less constrained by the limitations of mainstream history, propose that the Merovingians may have carried genetic or spiritual inheritance tracing back to ancient civilizations like Lemuria. The very notion seems audacious, yet the coincidences are striking. Accounts of mysterious journeys to distant lands, cryptic symbols adorning their crowns and sarcophagi, and legends preserved in obscure manuscripts hint at connections that span oceans and centuries. The ocean, in all its immensity, becomes a silent witness to these hidden histories. Each wave that breaks upon the shore carries whispers of a past submerged, cities swallowed without trace, dynasties erased from public record, knowledge carefully hidden in symbols, texts, and secret rituals. One cannot help but wonder what it would mean if even a fragment of Lemuria survived, encoded in the lineage of a royal family, guiding human destiny across millennia without the rest of the world noticing. Could the bloodline of kings be more than mere claim to earthly power? Could it be the carrier of wisdom too dangerous or too sacred to share openly? As we peer into the mists of time, we encounter tantalizing evidence that seems both impossible and undeniable. Manuscripts discovered in monasteries hint at knowledge of distant lands never touched by known civilizations. Oral traditions in remote regions speak of ancestors with strange features, customs, and knowledge that cannot be explained by local development alone. Even the oldest maps, often dismissed as fanciful, reveal a precision that suggests first-hand observation. How could someone in the Middle Ages, without modern instruments, produce representations of landmasses that do not exist today. Was it imagination, or were they recording memories of something older, something lost beneath the waves? And then there is the human element, the fear, devotion, and secrecy that have protected these stories across generations. Those who sought the truth often vanished without record. Knowledge was encoded in allegories, myths, and symbols, visible only to those initiated into the mysteries. The Merovingians, it seems, were not merely rulers, they were custodians. Custodians of a secret so profound that it could challenge the foundations of history itself. Every coronation, every ceremonial act, every carefully preserved relic hints at layers of meaning that ordinary observation could never uncover. This is the world we enter, a place where history and myth intertwine, where oceans guard their secrets with relentless patience, and where bloodlines carry the weight of lost civilizations. As we begin to trace the journey of the Merovingians and their possible connection to Lemuria, we are not merely recounting events long past. We are attempting to unravel a mystery encoded across time, geography, and human ambition. It is a story that moves through betrayal and devotion, through awe and fear, across continents and centuries, and ultimately asks a question that defies easy answer. What if the history we know is only the surface of a deeper truth? Beneath the waves, the continent sleeps. Beneath the crowns, the bloodline endures. Somewhere, in the murky depths of memory and legend, Lemuria waits, as does the possibility that the Merovingians, those long-haired kings of Gaul, hold a key to secrets humanity has nearly forgotten. And as we follow their trail, we must ask ourselves, are we ready to uncover a truth older than empires, older than the oceans themselves? In the shadows of European history, the Merovingians rise like an enigma shrouded in both reverence and suspicion. Known as the long-haired kings, they ruled over Gaul from the 5th to the 8th century, leaving behind chronicles that speak of conquest, alliances, and betrayals, but also of a family whose lineage seemed touched by something extraordinary. Their name is whispered in esoteric circles not merely for political influence, but for what some believe was an inheritance of something far older, something almost otherworldly. These kings were different, and their difference was noticed even by contemporaries. Legends tell of rulers whose hair was never cut, considered a symbol of divine favor, and whose mere presence inspired awe, loyalty, and fear in equal measure. But beneath these rituals of kingship lay a secret that history books barely dare to acknowledge: the suggestion that the Merovingian bloodline was more than noble, it might be sacred. From the very beginning, the Merovingians were surrounded by mystery. The dynasty is traditionally traced back to a semi-mythical figure, Merovec, whose origins are tangled in legend. Some accounts claim he was born of a mortal queen and a sea creature, a lamia of the ocean, an origin story blending human history with the fantastical. Other chroniclers hint at a celestial connection, suggesting that Merovec's line carried a spark of divine essence, a kind of genetic or spiritual inheritance that would persist through centuries. Whether fact or fiction, the narrative had a purpose: to elevate the dynasty above ordinary kings, giving them a sense of destiny, authority, and legitimacy that no ordinary family could claim. But it also planted the seeds of fear and obsession, for a lineage that claimed divine favor was a threat to those who sought power in more earthly ways. The Merovingians' rule was not merely ceremonial. They wielded influence over vast territories, their courts a tapestry of politics, alliances, and occasionally ruthless violence. Yet their authority seemed to be more than brute power. There was a sense that they were custodians of something hidden. Chroniclers record unusual customs surrounding the kings: secretive rituals, symbols carved in stone, and ceremonial objects that vanished from public view. Some scholars suggest these were relics of a far older knowledge, passed down through generations and preserved with almost religious devotion. These customs were not simply decorative, they were coded, a language of legacy only decipherable to those initiated into the bloodline. And if one could understand this language, it might reveal connections to lands and civilizations lost to time, civilizations like Lemuria. The fascination with the Merovingians extends beyond history into myth. In certain medieval chronicles, there are hints of kings whose power was inexplicable, whose insight and prescience seemed almost supernatural. They were said to understand the natural world in ways ordinary rulers could not, making decisions that preserved not only their kingdom but the fragile balance of alliances across Europe. Some accounts speak of their uncanny survival against assassinations, the sudden deaths of rivals, and the protection of sacred treasures. Could these be coincidences, or were they the result of knowledge and preparation inherited through a line of extraordinary foresight? To many historians, the stories are merely legend, to be admired but ultimately dismissed. To others, they are fragments of a hidden truth, a puzzle waiting to be pieced together across centuries. There is also the question of the Merovingian kings' peculiar longevity. Many rulers are reported to have lived unusually long lives for their time, their health and vigor preserved in a way that inspired both envy and speculation. Some modern theorists suggest that this may be explained by genetics, perhaps connected to a carefully preserved lineage that carried traits unseen elsewhere in Europe. Others argue that the combination of selective alliances, secret knowledge, and ritualized practices contributed to their survival. Whether biological, mystical, or a combination of both, the evidence points toward a dynasty that was intentionally protected, its secrets guarded fiercely from those who might misuse them. But what truly makes the Merovingians fascinating is their apparent connection to knowledge far beyond their immediate surroundings. Stories persist of members of the family traveling to distant lands, reaching India, Egypt, and even the mysterious East long before such journeys were common. They were in search not only of political alliances but of wisdom, manuscripts, rituals, and knowledge that might link them to ancient civilizations lost to memory. Could these travels be interpreted as mere diplomacy, or were they quests for something deeper, something that connected the Merovingians to the origins of human civilization itself? The question is tantalizing, for every hint suggests a deliberate pursuit of understanding, an inheritance that was as much intellectual and spiritual as it was genetic. The Merovingians' symbols further deepen the mystery. Their long hair, crowns, and sigils were not merely decorative but encoded meaning. Some historians suggest that certain symbols, repeated in manuscripts and relics, could point to locations of sacred sites or the existence of hidden texts. The recurring imagery of serpents, spirals, and celestial motifs hints at a language of knowledge that is at once spiritual and geographical, a code that connects lineage, land, and destiny. These symbols were everywhere in the Merovingian world, on coins, tombs, and ceremonial objects, but understood fully only by those who belonged to the inner circle. Each mark carried a message meant to survive the erasures of time, a breadcrumb trail for future generations of the bloodline. It is impossible to discuss the Merovingians without mentioning the tension between them and the rising power of the Church. As Christianity spread across Europe, kings whose authority seemed divine posed both a threat and a temptation. The Church sought to control, convert, or erase competing claims of divine right. Some argue that the suppression of certain Merovingian records and the eventual absorption of their kingdom into Carolingian rule was not merely political but also an attempt to eliminate knowledge deemed dangerous. A lineage that could claim connection to a forgotten civilization or an ancient source of wisdom would be a threat to any institution seeking absolute authority. Yet despite this, the Merovingians survived, their legacy whispered through clandestine networks, secret manuscripts, and coded symbols. Every chronicler, every monk, every traveler who recorded their stories contributed fragments to a puzzle that remains tantalizingly incomplete. The intrigue lies not in the known facts alone, but in the spaces between them, the moments when history and legend blur, when ordinary descriptions of kings hint at extraordinary purpose. As we explore their story, it becomes clear that the Merovingians were not merely rulers of a European kingdom. They were custodians of something far older, guardians of knowledge and legacy that may reach back to Lemuria itself. To understand them is to understand the threads of history that tie human ambition, divine aspiration, and ancient wisdom together. Their story invites us to question the familiar narratives of history, to peer into the spaces where fact and legend converge, and to consider that the past may hold secrets powerful enough to reshape our understanding of civilization. The long-haired kings of Gaul stand as both myth and reality, rulers whose lives were ordinary in some ways yet extraordinary in others. They remind us that history is not merely the sum of battles won or lands conquered, but also the inheritance of memory, knowledge, and secret truths passed silently from generation to generation. In their bloodline may lie the key not only to a lost kingdom but to the enduring mysteries of human civilization. A line that stretches across centuries, continents, and perhaps even oceans, carrying within it the echoes of a world we may never fully know. The rise of the Merovingians was as much a tale of ambition as it was of destiny. In the fragmented landscape of post-Roman Gaul, power was not inherited by law but seized by cunning, alliances, and, sometimes, brute force. Small kingdoms jostled for dominance, local chieftains wove fragile allegiances, and the shadow of Rome still lingered, its ruins a silent reminder of impermanence. Into this tumult stepped Merovec and his descendants, figures whose presence would reshape the political map of Europe, and whose influence may have stretched far beyond mere territory. Their ascent was marked by a combination of strategy, symbolism, and an uncanny ability to inspire loyalty that bordered on reverence. To the people of Gaul, the Merovingians were more than rulers. They were chosen, set apart by lineage, long hair, and aura, a living bridge between the mortal and the divine. The first generations of Merovingian kings understood the fragile nature of power. Conquest alone would not secure their legacy. They needed legitimacy, a story that bound them to the sacred and the cosmic. Chroniclers tell of rituals performed in shadowed groves, of sacred oaths taken under the watch of ancient stones, and of ceremonies designed to signal divine favor. These were not mere formalities. They were coded messages, signaling to allies and enemies alike that the Merovingians were heirs to something far older than the kingdoms they ruled. Even as they battled rival chieftains and secured territories, their public displays of ritual and ceremony hinted at a knowledge or authority that transcended mere politics. In a world still trying to comprehend the collapse of Rome, such a display of mysterious power was both a shield and a weapon. Yet, the true genius of the Merovingians was subtle. While wars were waged in the open, another battle was fought in whispers, in shadows, and in hidden chambers. Their advisors, priests, and secret councils were custodians of esoteric knowledge, guiding the kings not only in governance, but in understanding patterns unseen by ordinary rulers. Some historians suggest that these inner circles preserved fragments of lost civilizations, ancient wisdom that might have originated in civilizations like Lemuria, which had vanished beneath the waves long before history recorded its existence. To outsiders, this knowledge appeared as mere superstition, but for the Merovingians, it was a tool of survival and control, a hidden engine behind every alliance, victory, and act of diplomacy. From the earliest days of their consolidation, the Merovingians displayed an almost instinctive understanding of human psychology. They knew how to command loyalty without tyranny, how to inspire fear without alienation, and how to balance ambition with ritual. Kings like Clovis I, often cited as the dynasty's first unifier, demonstrated this blend of pragmatism and spectacle. He was a warrior, yes, but he also understood the power of symbolism. The baptism of Clovis into Christianity, a watershed moment in European history, was not just a religious act. It was a statement, a calculated merger of divine sanction with political necessity. By adopting the religion of the Romanized elites, he secured allies, disarmed rivals, and cloaked his lineage in sanctity. Yet, behind this public display, some suggest there remained a deeper, secret understanding, a continuation of older, hidden rituals preserved within the bloodline, a silent acknowledgement of knowledge older than Rome itself. The Merovingians' expansion was accompanied by a careful preservation of symbols and artifacts. Coins, jewelry, and ceremonial objects bore motifs that are still studied today, symbols that may have encoded directions, sacred knowledge, or even genealogical secrets. Spirals, serpents, and celestial emblems recur across their artifacts, suggesting a hidden language designed to survive the ravages of conquest and time. These symbols were part of a continuum, a narrative of identity and inheritance carefully crafted to ensure that the Merovingians' true significance would not be lost, even as kings rose and fell. The lineage was not merely a claim to land. It was a vessel for history, myth, and perhaps knowledge that reached back to civilizations like Lemuria, whose memory survived in fragments, embedded in bloodlines and ritual. Conflict, of course, was inevitable. The rise of the Merovingians threatened rival clans, local elites, and the remnants of Roman authority. Battles were fought on fields of mud and blood, but the true struggle was often psychological and symbolic. Kings needed to assert dominance while preserving the aura of divine favor. Diplomacy was a ritualized performance. Alliances were carefully engineered, and the display of power was as much about perception as reality. In this way, the Merovingians mastered a dual strategy: outward conquest through force and inward conquest through the cultivation of awe, respect, and the subtle manipulation of belief. Their success lay not merely in sword or shield, but in the careful orchestration of destiny itself. Travel and trade also played a crucial role in their rise. While many kings remained confined within their borders, the Merovingians were unusually mobile. Envoys, messengers, and sometimes the kings themselves ventured into distant lands, reaching as far as the east, seeking knowledge, alliances, and treasures. These journeys were not merely political but may have been part of a larger effort to understand the world beyond Europe, to access hidden wisdom preserved in distant civilizations. Some accounts, though fragmentary, suggest that certain Merovingians returned with knowledge that could not be explained by the means available at the time. Astronomical observations, medicinal practices, and perhaps even philosophical or spiritual insights. These glimpses of extraordinary understanding further enhanced their aura, making them figures both feared and revered. Yet not all was stability and grandeur. The consolidation of power was marked by intrigue, betrayal, and secrecy. Relatives and allies could turn to enemies, and dynastic struggles often erupted into violence. Yet even in the midst of such danger, the Merovingians seemed guided by an unspoken code, a preservation of the bloodline, a safeguarding of knowledge, and a continuity of purpose. Legends speak of hidden vaults, secret texts, and lost relics, all carefully guarded against those deemed unworthy. It was as if the dynasty understood that their significance was not merely political but existential, the survival of a legacy older than any kingdom, older perhaps than memory itself. As the Merovingians established themselves across Gaul, their influence began to ripple beyond immediate geography. Neighboring kingdoms, aware of their power, approached them with caution, while distant civilizations may have observed them with curiosity. The dynasty's long-haired kings were more than rulers. They were a mystery wrapped in a crown, a lineage whose significance extended into realms both spiritual and temporal. Every victory, every ritual, every secret journey strengthened the sense that the Merovingians were more than historical actors. They were custodians of something hidden, something that would continue to intrigue, puzzle, and inspire curiosity for centuries to come. The rise of the Merovingians, therefore, is not merely a story of conquest and rule. It is a story of a family that understood the interplay of power, perception, and preservation. It is a tale of kings who walked the fine line between history and myth, who leveraged belief, ritual, and secrecy to secure not just their kingdom, but the continuity of a lineage that may carry the echoes of lost civilizations. In tracing their ascent, we begin to glimpse the delicate threads connecting Gaul to distant lands, to hidden knowledge, and perhaps to something far older than Europe itself. A secret preserved in blood and memory, waiting patiently beneath the layers of history. Maps have always been more than tools. They are mirrors of human understanding, reflections of knowledge, belief, and imagination. In the dusty archives of Europe, among faded parchment and ink-stained margins, there exist maps that hint at worlds beyond the known, territories that defy both logic and history. One of these tantalizing mysteries points to Lemuria, a sunken continent whose presence has been recorded in fragmented texts and cartographic anomalies across centuries. To the untrained eye, these maps are curiosities, perhaps the products of artistic imagination or miscalculation. Yet, to those willing to look closer, they suggest something far more profound. A hidden geography of the past, a record of lands that once existed, and a connection to the Merovingian bloodline that ordinary history has yet to acknowledge. In the 17th and 18th centuries, as explorers pushed the boundaries of the known world, Cartographers compiled charts that sometimes included territories long forgotten or entirely unknown. Islands appeared in the middle of oceans, coastlines that vanished in later editions, and continents whose shapes refused to correspond to anything visible today. Among these anomalies, Lemuria is often cited, particularly in maps documenting the Indian Ocean and surrounding regions. Some islands, once meticulously recorded, simply disappeared, leaving only faint traces of their existence in margin notes or obscure maritime logs. For scholars of esoteric history, these disappearances were not accidents. They were deliberate, perhaps a reflection of knowledge that had to be protected, hidden from those unprepared to understand its significance. The precision of some of these maps is remarkable. Even without modern instruments, cartographers documented longitudes, latitudes, and oceanic patterns with an accuracy that modern researchers find astonishing. Some suggest that this knowledge could not have come from imagination alone. Were these mapmakers recording remnants of older knowledge, information preserved by secret societies or passed down through generations who remembered lands now submerged? Could the Merovingians, a dynasty shrouded in secrecy and steeped in ritual, have possessed access to such knowledge, guiding explorers and scholars alike in ways hidden from public view? The possibility stretches the imagination, yet it is supported by subtle clues scattered across centuries of cartography. Lemuria is more than just a dot on an old map. In many esoteric texts, it is described as a civilization of extraordinary sophistication, with knowledge of natural laws, medicine, astronomy, and perhaps even spiritual practices lost to the modern world. If the Merovingians carried knowledge of the civilization, it could explain their enduring mystique, their unusual customs, and the symbols encoded in their crowns, coins, and manuscripts. Spirals, serpents, and celestial motifs recur across both maps and Merovingian artifacts, hinting at a shared understanding of cosmic and terrestrial principles. To the casual observer, these are decorative flourishes. To the initiated, they are guides, codes, and keys, suggesting that geography, lineage, and secret knowledge were intimately connected. The disappearance of islands and continents from maps adds another layer of intrigue. Some islands are carefully erased in subsequent editions. Others are reinterpreted with vague annotations or warnings. Scholars debate whether this was due to better understanding of geography, maritime error, or something far more deliberate. Could it be that knowledge of Lemuria and other lost lands was considered too dangerous to be widely known, and thus systematically erased? The Merovingians, custodians of bloodline secrets, may have been instrumental in preserving fragments of this knowledge, encoded not in books alone but in lineage, ritual, and symbol, a living map carried forward through generations. Across different cultures, fragmented references to lost continents appear. Some speak of Mu, others of Atlantis, yet Lemuria stands out in maps and maritime logs for its consistency and the precision with which its location is recorded. These fragments suggest a collective memory, a shared awareness of lands that were once real, now submerged beneath the waves. The Merovingians' supposed connection to Lemuria may not have been merely symbolic. It may have been a tangible link to a lost world, a bridge between human memory and forgotten geography, preserved across centuries in blood, ritual, and mapmaking. Even the language used on these maps is cryptic. Marginal notes reference hidden lands, sacred oceans, and places of origin, terms that may encode directions or warnings to those capable of interpreting them. To ordinary eyes, they are obscure, perhaps poetic. To those initiated into the Merovingian lineage, they could be literal. The idea that geography itself could be a vessel for secrets, a medium through which knowledge of a lost civilization could be preserved, is both thrilling and unsettling. Maps become more than representations of terrain. They are repositories of memory, a coded interface between the known and the unknown. It is here that the intersection of cartography and bloodline becomes most intriguing. The Merovingians' supposed access to these maps, their preservation of symbols, and their travels to distant lands suggest a deliberate effort to safeguard knowledge. Kings may have commissioned copies of ancient charts, encoded directions in ritual objects, and sent emissaries to distant regions to confirm or recover forgotten information. Every detail, from the spirals etched on a crown to the symbols carved in stone, may have been a coordinate, a mnemonic device, or a warning designed to protect knowledge too precious to expose openly. Some maps even hint at a global pattern, a network of lost continents and civilizations, each connected in ways that modern scholars have only begun to speculate upon. Lemuria, positioned in the Indian Ocean, is part of a tapestry that includes references to sunken lands near the Americas and the Pacific. The idea of a hidden, interconnected geography raises profound questions. Could human civilization itself be shaped by forces we barely understand, guided by knowledge preserved in maps and bloodlines? Were the Merovingians not simply rulers of Gaul, but part of a larger story, custodians of memory and wisdom that transcended continents and oceans? The power of these maps lies not only in what they depict, but in what they conceal. Each line, each annotation, is a clue, a fragment of a story waiting to be reconstructed. And yet, for every map discovered, dozens were likely lost, destroyed, or deliberately hidden. The survival of even a single chart becomes a testament to the diligence and foresight of those who sought to preserve history in a world that constantly threatened to forget it. The Merovingians, with their secretive lineage and coded symbols, may have been among the few capable of maintaining continuity, ensuring that fragments of Lemuria survived the erosion of centuries. To study these maps is to step into a world where myth and history converge, where the ocean itself becomes a silent archive, and where a royal bloodline may carry the key to understanding what lies beneath the waves. Lemuria is no longer merely a story told by dreamers. It is a puzzle, an invitation, and perhaps a warning. The Merovingians' role in this story elevates them beyond kings. They become custodians of something profound, guardians of a hidden geography, whose secrets may have influenced human civilization in ways we can only begin to imagine. As we trace the lines on these ancient charts, as we follow the patterns of disappearing islands and coded annotations, a larger question emerges. What was the purpose of preserving such knowledge, and why was it entrusted to a single dynasty? The answer may lie not only in power or politics, but in something far deeper, a desire to safeguard the memory of a lost civilization, to carry forward the knowledge of Lemuria, and to ensure that the secrets embedded in the bloodline and in the maps survived, quietly, across the centuries, waiting for those patient enough to uncover them. Symbols have always been humanity's way of speaking across time, a language that transcends words and survives centuries. For the Merovingians, symbols were not merely decorative or ceremonial. They were a form of communication, a method of preserving knowledge, and perhaps even a key to understanding the secrets of a lost civilization like Lemuria. From the spirals etched into their crowns to serpents curling across sacred objects, every motif carried meaning, a hidden message for those who could interpret it. To outsiders, these signs might appear ornamental, mystical, or even arbitrary. But for the initiates of the bloodline, they were maps, guides, and mnemonic devices, encoded with lessons meant to endure the decay of time. The most iconic of these symbols was the long hair of the kings themselves. It was a visible declaration of their lineage, an emblem of continuity, and, according to legend, a vessel for inherited power. The hair was never cut, for to cut it was to break the thread of memory and authority that tied the king to his ancestors. In some interpretations, the flowing hair represented the invisible currents of energy, knowledge, or life force coursing through the bloodline. Coupled with other symbols, it became a living, dynamic expression of identity, a silent statement to subjects and adversaries alike that the Merovingians were more than mere rulers. They were custodians of a legacy older than kingdoms, older than memory. Crests, crowns, and ceremonial objects were equally significant. Spirals recur again and again, a motif seen in prehistoric art, megalithic sites, and esoteric manuscripts. In Merovingian artifacts, the spiral may have symbolized cycles of time, cosmic order, or the interconnectedness of all things. Serpents, often depicted biting their tails or coiling in intricate patterns, hint at themes of eternity, protection, and hidden knowledge. Celestial motifs, such as stars, suns, and moon crescents, suggest an understanding of the heavens that extended beyond superstition. These symbols were not randomly chosen. They were deliberate, each one a layer of meaning meant to encode knowledge, perhaps even the location, history, and significance of lands lost to time like Lemuria. In addition to decorative motifs, inscriptions and coded texts appear throughout Merovingian artifacts. Often written in cryptic alphabets or obscure ciphers, these texts are challenging to decipher, but scholars have suggested that they may encode genealogical records, sacred knowledge, or instructions for maintaining the bloodline's legacy. Some texts hint at rituals tied to astronomical events. Others describe ceremonies designed to align earthly actions with cosmic principles. In all cases, the symbols functioned as a bridge, connecting the physical world to a spiritual and intellectual continuum. They were a message for those who could read between the lines, a guide, a warning, and a repository of knowledge all at once. The use of symbols extended into architecture and sacred spaces. Churches, palaces, and burial sites associated with the Merovingians often display carvings, patterns, and alignments that appear deliberate, suggesting an understanding of geometry and cosmology beyond the ordinary. Some researchers have argued that the placement of buildings, chambers, and sacred objects was designed to preserve or channel knowledge, much like the symbols on their crowns and coins. In this way, the dynasty transformed their realm into a living archive, a physical manifestation of memory, power, and secret understanding. Every stone, every spiral, every alignment was part of a network meant to endure beyond the reach of time and human interference. Even mundane objects carried symbolic weight. Coins, for instance, were not merely currency but carriers of encoded messages. The imagery chosen for minting, patterns, animals, celestial symbols, was deliberate. Each detail chosen to preserve continuity, transmit information, or signal allegiance. Coins circulated widely, becoming miniature emissaries of knowledge, spreading fragments of encoded meaning across the kingdom. In this sense, symbols were not static. They were dynamic, moving, alive, constantly reinforcing the connection between ruler, subject, and hidden legacy. Rituals themselves were profoundly symbolic. Ceremonies surrounding coronations, marriages, and burials were infused with meaning, carefully orchestrated to align with celestial events, ancestral tradition, or coded principles of the bloodline. Each gesture, each chant, each placement of an object could carry layers of significance, comprehensible only to those initiated into the inner knowledge of the dynasty. These rituals were more than spectacle. They were methods of preserving information, ensuring that the essence of the lineage, the knowledge, wisdom, and perhaps secrets of civilizations like Lemuria, survived intact across generations. The protective function of symbols cannot be overstated. Throughout history, the Merovingians faced political enemies, ecclesiastical pressure, and societal upheaval. Their knowledge, if exposed, could have been misused or destroyed. Symbols acted as a safeguard, a means of encoding information in plain sight while concealing its true meaning from the uninitiated. This duality, visibility for protection, invisibility for secrecy, allowed the bloodline to survive, maintaining continuity despite centuries of conquest, religious transformation, and societal change. Furthermore, the universality of these symbols suggests a deep understanding of cultural memory. Spirals, serpents, and celestial motifs appear across civilizations separated by oceans and millennia, from megalithic structures in Europe to temple carvings in the East. This recurrence may indicate a shared knowledge, a collective memory of ancient wisdom that the Merovingians inherited and preserved. Could these symbols serve as a bridge between the lost continent of Lemuria and the bloodline that claimed descent from it? Could they encode not only instructions, rituals, or genealogical records, but a map, spiritual, intellectual, or perhaps even geographic, linking the kings of Gaul to a civilization lost beneath the waves? Ultimately, the Merovingian use of symbols demonstrates a sophistication that blends the practical with the mystical, the human with the cosmic. Each emblem, whether on a crown, coin, or manuscript, is a thread in a larger tapestry, a message crafted to endure time, conflict, and oblivion. These signs speak not only of kingship but of responsibility, legacy, and the careful preservation of knowledge. They hint at a worldview in which power is inseparable from wisdom, and wisdom is inseparable from history, both remembered and hidden. Symbols, then, are the language of the Merovingians. Through them, we glimpse the dynasty not merely as rulers of Gaul but as custodians of something older, something almost sacred. Their symbols are whispers across centuries, calling attention to what has been lost, what has been preserved, and what may still lie hidden beneath oceans, buried in manuscripts, or encoded in bloodlines. They are evidence that the Merovingians were not just kings. They were stewards of memory, knowledge, and perhaps a secret older than the lands they ruled. As we trace the spirals, serpents, and celestial patterns, we begin to see the contours of a hidden world, one that bridges myth and history, bloodline and lost civilization, ritual and cosmic order. Symbols were not mere art. They were survival, communication, and perhaps the key to understanding the mysteries of Lemuria itself, preserved in plain sight by the long-haired kings whose lineage still sparks wonder, speculation, and the hope of revelation. The rise of the Merovingians, with their long hair, secret symbols, and whispered knowledge, inevitably drew attention, not all of it benign. By the time the dynasty reached its zenith, the Church had begun to assert unprecedented influence over Europe. Bishops, abbots, and councils wielded power not merely spiritual but political, often rivaling kings in authority. To the Church, the Merovingians were a peculiar threat. On the surface, they appeared Christian, particularly following Clovis I's baptism, which had aligned the dynasty with Rome's ecclesiastical authority. But beneath the veneer of piety lay customs, rituals, and symbols that seemed to draw on an older, forbidden knowledge. The tension between divine sanction from the Church and the secret, possibly pre-Christian, inheritance of the Merovingians would shape the dynasty's fate, and perhaps the preservation of a hidden world. The Church's scrutiny was relentless. Chroniclers, often monks, documented the king's lives with a mixture of awe and suspicion. They marveled at the Merovingians' longevity, their uncanny political foresight, and their command over both nobles and commoners. Yet, these same chronicles hint at unease, often portraying the dynasty as enigmatic or even dangerous. Were these accounts objective observations, or subtle attempts to paint the kings as heretical or supernatural to justify eventual intervention? Historians have debated this for centuries. Some suggest that the Church, recognizing the dynasty's unusual influence and secretive practices, sought to exert control or even erase traces of knowledge that might rival ecclesiastical authority. The most striking manifestation of this tension was the gradual diminishing of Merovingian political power in favor of the Carolingians. While the kings remained nominal rulers, the mayors of the palace, the Carolingian elite, began consolidating real authority. Some accounts suggest that this shift was not merely political but also a strategic effort to control the lineage's secrets. By reducing the Merovingians to figureheads, the Church and allied nobles could oversee the bloodline while neutralizing potential threats posed by knowledge preserved in rituals, symbols, and ancestry. What is lost in traditional history is the subtle battle over memory itself, the preservation or suppression of a lineage that may have carried wisdom reaching back to Lemuria. Evidence of the Church's influence, and its desire to control knowledge, can be seen in the destruction or concealment of texts, codices, and symbols. Monastic libraries, often the repositories of both sacred and secular learning, were carefully curated. Manuscripts deemed heretical, subversive, or too revealing were burned, hidden, or rewritten. For the Merovingians, whose lineage may have been intertwined with pre-Christian civilizations and advanced knowledge, this presented a profound threat. Every ritual, every symbol, and every encoded artifact became a matter of survival. Preservation required caution, secrecy, and an understanding that knowledge could be more dangerous than armies. Yet, the Merovingians were not passive. They adapted to the pressures, embedding their wisdom in layers of symbolism, coded texts, and ceremonial practice that the Church could not easily decipher. Long hair, coins, crowns, and sacred architecture became vessels of hidden meaning. In some cases, monasteries, ostensibly centers of ecclesiastical oversight, may have functioned as covert allies, preserving artifacts and knowledge under the guise of orthodoxy. The dynasty's secret knowledge was not eradicated. It was concealed in plain sight, surviving centuries of scrutiny and suppression. This delicate balance between visibility and secrecy would become one of the defining features of the Merovingians' endurance. The conflict between the Merovingians and the Church also shaped perceptions of kingship itself. While the Church promoted rulers as instruments of divine will, the Merovingians claimed a more direct, almost intrinsic connection to sacred authority. The contrast was profound. One system emphasized obedience, ritualized devotion, and external validation. The other, the Merovingian system, centered on inherited insight, cosmic alignment, and the preservation of ancient memory. This divergence fueled suspicion and political maneuvering. Kings who were seen as custodians of forbidden knowledge were both revered and feared, their authority under constant challenge. The methods by which the Church attempted to neutralize potential threats were subtle yet effective. Monks and scribes could manipulate history through selective recording or omission. Chronicles omitted the more mystical aspects of the Merovingian lineage, and genealogical records were altered or concealed. In some cases, entire branches of the family disappeared from public record, either through marriage alliances designed to obscure lineage or through deliberate erasure. The Merovingian survival depended on their ability to encode knowledge in ways that transcended textual representation. Symbols, rituals, and oral transmission became the primary means of preservation. Knowledge was embedded in the rhythm of ceremony, the alignment of sacred spaces, and the gestures of kings and priests alike. This suppression was not limited to abstract knowledge. There are accounts of relics, artifacts, and sacred objects being hidden, often in remote locations or buried beneath layers of architecture designed to obscure their significance. Some scholars argue that these objects contained encoded information about the origins of the Merovingian bloodline, the geography of lost civilizations, and perhaps even technological or spiritual practices inherited from Lemuria. Whether these artifacts still exist, lost to time or carefully guarded, is a matter of speculation, but their historical presence suggests that the dynasty's knowledge was tangible, material, and considered valuable enough to protect at all costs. The tension between the Church and the Merovingians also gave rise to a culture of secrecy and esoteric tradition. Certain families, priests, and scholars became custodians of hidden wisdom, transmitting it through allegory, coded language, and ritualized instruction. This culture was carefully designed to survive scrutiny. Only the initiated could comprehend the full meaning of the signs, gestures, and texts. For centuries, this network preserved the essence of the Merovingian legacy, allowing knowledge, symbols, and lineage to endure even as political power shifted away from the dynasty. In this way, suppression became a crucible that refined the preservation of secrets, making them resilient to external threats. The story of the Merovingians and the Church highlights a broader tension in history: the struggle over memory, knowledge, and interpretation. Political power is visible, tangible, and often violent, but the control of knowledge is subtle, enduring, and infinitely more potent. By targeting the lineage's symbols, texts, and rituals, the Church sought not only to consolidate authority, but also to control the narrative of history itself. The Merovingians, in turn, responded by embedding their knowledge in layers of secrecy that could survive centuries of oversight and suppression. This silent conflict shaped the trajectory of European history in ways that remain largely invisible. A war fought not with armies but with ink, stone, and ritual. Ultimately, the shadow of the Church over the Merovingians adds depth and tension to the dynasty's story. The kings were not only rulers of a kingdom, they were custodians of a hidden world, preserving wisdom that may have originated in lost civilizations, maintaining symbols and rituals that encoded cosmic and geographic knowledge, and navigating centuries of political and religious scrutiny. Their survival, against the odds, is a testament to the power of secrecy, the resilience of tradition, and the enduring influence of a bloodline that sought to preserve knowledge too valuable to be exposed. As we examine this intersection of ecclesiastical authority and hidden legacy, we begin to understand the stakes of the Merovingian survival. They were not merely preserving a family line. They were safeguarding memory, knowledge, and perhaps the key to understanding civilizations long lost beneath the oceans. The Church's scrutiny, far from extinguishing the dynasty, shaped the methods by which this knowledge was preserved, forcing the Merovingians to innovate, conceal, and encode secrets in ways that continue to intrigue historians, scholars, and seekers of mysteries to this day. Even as the Merovingians navigated the delicate dance with the church, the dynasty embarked on journeys that few chroniclers fully recorded. These were not mere political embassies or military campaigns, but secret quests, travels undertaken in search of knowledge, artifacts, and connections that lay beyond the known world. The kings, accompanied by trusted advisors, priests, and sometimes scholars from distant lands, ventured into forests, mountains, and coastlines whose significance extended far beyond immediate strategy. In some cases, these journeys took them across seas to distant islands, along routes that intersected with trade networks, spiritual centers, and perhaps even remnants of civilizations lost to history, like Lemuria. The purpose of these travels was never merely exploration. It was preservation, retrieval, and sometimes initiation into hidden knowledge. The secrecy surrounding these journeys was paramount. Maps and records were often encoded, deliberately misleading, or erased entirely. Accounts that survive today are fragmentary, often cloaked in allegory, metaphor, or the language of saints and scribes who could not openly describe what they had witnessed. For example, some texts speak of islands of wisdom beneath the sun's gaze or temples hidden where the waves kiss the earth. Cryptic references that may allude to sunken continents, sacred archives, or repositories of knowledge left behind by civilizations long forgotten. To the uninitiated, these descriptions are poetic and vague. To the Merovingians, they were coordinates, both literal and spiritual, guiding them toward insights that could not survive in ordinary chronicles. Travel for the Merovingians was also an exercise in diplomacy layered with subterfuge. Envoys were sometimes sent ahead to establish alliances or investigate regions under the guise of commerce or political necessity. Meanwhile, the kings themselves moved in relative secrecy, navigating routes that minimized exposure while maximizing access to knowledge. Islands, river mouths, and coastal towns were not merely geographic points. They were nodes in a network of information, places where oral traditions, artifacts, and even celestial alignments hinted at truths too powerful to be widely known. These journeys required courage, cunning, and patience, qualities that were essential to maintaining both the dynasty's political power and the integrity of its hidden knowledge. Among the more tantalizing reports of Merovingian travel are references to sacred relics, mysterious manuscripts, and artifacts retrieved from forgotten temples or sunken ruins. Some chronicles describe kings returning with objects that could heal, illuminate, or protect, often accompanied by instructions encoded in symbols or ritual practice. Scholars have speculated that these artifacts were not merely ceremonial but functional, containing encoded knowledge, maps, or spiritual insight from civilizations like Lemuria. The nature of these relics remains largely speculative. No surviving artifact can be definitively linked to such expeditions, but the repeated emphasis on their significance in fragmentary accounts suggests they played a central role in the dynasty's understanding of the world and its hidden currents. The geographic scope of these journeys is also significant. Some evidence suggests that Merovingian emissaries or even kings themselves may have traveled as far as the Mediterranean, North Africa, and the Middle East, visiting centers of learning, trade, and spiritual significance. These journeys were not merely exploratory. They were missions to gather knowledge, establish networks, and access wisdom preserved in distant lands. In some cases, the routes taken correspond intriguingly with locations that later esoteric scholars associate with sunken or lost continents, hinting at a deeper purpose than mere diplomacy. Every step, every port, and every alliance became part of a strategy to maintain the continuity of knowledge that was as fragile as it was powerful. Legends suggest that some Merovingians even ventured into the most mysterious regions of the known world. Remote islands, uncharted coasts, and waters where storms and currents conspired to keep ordinary travelers away. The risks were immense. Shipwreck, disease, and political entanglements threatened both lives and the secrets they carried. Yet these journeys were undertaken with meticulous preparation, guided by both observation and ritual, blending practical navigation with spiritual attunement. Observing celestial alignments, reading ocean currents, and consulting coded maps, the Merovingians turned travel into both science and art, a method of connecting with worlds lost to ordinary memory. The purpose of these expeditions was not always clear, even to contemporaries. Chronicles often obscure the intent, couching descriptions in allegory, biblical references, or poetic metaphor. Islands are pearls of the horizon, temples are houses of eternal light, and texts are voices in the wind. Yet, piecing together these fragments suggests a coherent pattern. The Merovingians sought to connect with knowledge and relics that lay outside conventional European memory, preserving secrets from older civilizations and ensuring that their bloodline maintained a bridge between history, myth, and hidden wisdom. Travel also reinforced the spiritual and initiatory aspect of the dynasty. Journeys were often undertaken as rites of passage, with kings and heirs participating in rituals at sacred sites, aligning with celestial events, or receiving instruction from custodians of ancient knowledge. These journeys were transformative, embedding in the rulers an understanding that transcended politics and war, connecting them to a larger vision of human history and cosmic order. This spiritual dimension reinforced the notion that the Merovingians were not merely temporal rulers, but custodians of a lineage that carried memory, wisdom, and perhaps even power inherited from lost civilizations like Lemuria. The secrecy surrounding these expeditions also ensured that the knowledge gathered remained in the hands of the bloodline. Trusted advisors, family members, and initiated priests acted as guardians, transmitting insights orally, through ritual, or encoded in symbols. Documentation, if any, was encrypted or deliberately obscure. In this way, travel became not just a physical act but a strategy for safeguarding information, a means of extending the dynasty's reach while preserving its most valuable secrets. Even after the journeys concluded, their influence persisted. Knowledge and artifacts were integrated into the dynasty's ceremonial life, their symbols encoded in crowns, coins, architecture, and manuscripts. Celestial alignments observed during travel informed ritual timing, and discoveries made in distant lands were translated into practices that strengthened the dynasty's continuity and legitimacy. The Merovingians' understanding of geography, astronomy, and esoteric wisdom allowed them to shape both perception and reality, embedding hidden layers of meaning into everyday life. Ultimately, the Merovingians' secret travels reveal a dynasty far more complex than conventional history records. They were not merely rulers of Gaul. They were explorers, seekers, and guardians of knowledge. Their expeditions were acts of preservation, discovery, and initiation, designed to connect a fading past with the promise of continuity through blood, ritual, and symbol. Through these journeys, they maintained a living link to lost civilizations, protected hidden wisdom from the scrutiny of external authorities like the Church, and ensured that the essence of their lineage, its power, insight, and secrets, would survive the trials of time. As we follow the traces of their travels, we see a pattern emerge. A dynasty moving through both visible and invisible worlds, bridging human and cosmic knowledge, history, and myth. Their journeys were both literal and symbolic, a way to navigate geography and memory, to preserve a hidden legacy, and to ensure that the bloodline carried forward a connection to lands and wisdom lost beneath the oceans. In tracing these expeditions, we glimpse not only the courage and ingenuity of the Merovingians, but also the profound stakes of their mission. The survival of secrets that may challenge everything we know about the origins of civilizations, the preservation of knowledge, and the hidden history of our world. The Merovingians' journeys and symbolic practices converged in a singularly compelling arena: ritual. Unlike the public ceremonies that celebrated kingship and appeased subjects, these rituals were secret, esoteric, and intensely focused on the preservation and transmission of knowledge. They were designed to encode wisdom, maintain the continuity of the bloodline, and align the family with forces, natural, celestial, and perhaps even cosmic, that were beyond the comprehension of ordinary people. Every gesture, chant, and placement of objects carried layers of meaning, each element carefully orchestrated to safeguard secrets inherited from civilizations long lost, like Lemuria. At the heart of these ceremonies was the concept of sacred time. Rituals were rarely performed arbitrarily. They were aligned with celestial events, the rising of certain stars, the phases of the moon, or solar cycles that marked precise points in the year. These alignments were not merely symbolic. They were believed to activate hidden energies, connect the living to ancestral memory, and maintain the power inherent in the bloodline. Kings were trained to recognize patterns in the heavens and to understand how these patterns corresponded to human and earthly events. By performing rituals at specific times, the Merovingians created a bridge between the cosmic and the terrestrial, ensuring that their knowledge remained alive, potent, and protected. Objects used in these rituals were equally deliberate. Sacred swords, crowns, and ceremonial vessels were more than ornaments. They were instruments of memory, coded repositories of knowledge. Some artifacts bore symbols so intricate that their meaning could be deciphered only by those initiated into the dynasty's mysteries. Spirals, serpents, stars, and crescents were repeated across manuscripts, ceremonial clothing, and objects, creating a language of continuity. Each ritual acted as both a performance and a transmission device, preserving wisdom in a form that transcended writing, surviving even when manuscripts were destroyed or lost. Initiation rites were particularly significant. They often involved young heirs of the bloodline being exposed to symbolic acts, coded teachings, and meditative practices that conveyed knowledge far beyond ordinary learning. These initiations were not public. They occurred behind closed doors in sacred chambers, sometimes within monasteries or hidden spaces within palaces. The initiates were taught to read the language of symbols, to interpret cosmic patterns, and to understand the intricate connections between the dynasty, the physical world, and what remained of lost civilizations such as Lemuria. The act of initiation was simultaneously an education, a rite of passage, and a preservation of memory. The ceremonies also included the use of sound, chant, and sometimes music. Certain tones and rhythms were believed to resonate with the natural world, activating subtle energies and reinforcing the continuity of knowledge. Monastic records hint at chants that were repeated during coronations, marriages, and seasonal observances. Phrases that seemed simple but were, in fact, coded instructions, mnemonic devices, or invocations of cosmic alignment. These auditory elements created layers of meaning that could survive centuries, transmitted through repetition and ritualized practice, even when the context of their origin was forgotten by later generations. One of the most enigmatic aspects of these rituals is their connection to the natural world. Rivers, groves, hills, and even specific stones played roles in ceremonial acts. These sites were not chosen arbitrarily. They were believed to possess particular energies or to serve as points of alignment with cosmic or terrestrial forces. Kings and initiates were instructed to interact with these sites in precise ways. Walking patterns, gestures, and placements of objects followed strict protocols, all designed to reinforce the power of the bloodline and the preservation of knowledge. Even subtle variations in these rituals could be significant, altering their efficacy and the transmission of encoded wisdom. The secrecy surrounding these ceremonies was paramount. Outsiders were seldom aware of their true purpose. To the uninitiated, they appeared as elaborate pageantry or religious devotion. To the initiated, every element was purposeful, every action a safeguard of knowledge. This secrecy ensured that even when the dynasty's political power waned, the wisdom they preserved could survive. Monks, family members, and trusted allies acted as custodians, witnessing and recording aspects of the rituals in symbolic form, passing knowledge in ways that could not be easily destroyed or understood by those outside the inner circle. The connection to Lemuria becomes particularly intriguing in this context. Many scholars suggest that the rituals encoded memory of a lost civilization, its knowledge of astronomy, medicine, navigation, and spiritual practices. Elements of these ceremonies, celestial alignment, sacred geometry, and symbolic objects, appear strikingly similar to those described in esoteric accounts of Lemuria. If true, the Merovingians were not merely preserving ancestral power, but were safeguarding fragments of a civilization that the world had long forgotten, embedding this knowledge into their bloodline, symbols, and ritual practice. Even the act of observation was ritualized. Kings and initiates were trained to watch for signs in nature. The behavior of animals, the movement of clouds, or the subtle changes in light and shadow. These observations were not superstition. They were interpreted as signals, echoes, or reminders of knowledge encoded in the natural world. The connection between observation, ritual, and memory created a dynamic system of preservation that could survive across centuries, even under the scrutiny of authorities who might have sought to suppress it. Rituals also reinforced identity. By participating in these ceremonies, members of the bloodline were reminded that they were custodians of something larger than themselves. They were entrusted with a legacy that connected them to lost civilizations, secret knowledge, and cosmic principles. This sense of duty created cohesion, loyalty, and resilience, ensuring that even in times of political upheaval, the essence of the Merovingian line could endure. The bloodline was more than genetics. It was a living archive, a vessel for memory, knowledge, and power, preserved through careful, intentional acts. Finally, these rituals offer a glimpse into the emotional and human side of the dynasty. Kings were not merely performing abstract acts. They were participating in ceremonies that carried immense responsibility, anxiety, and hope. Each ritual was a reminder of what was at stake: the survival of knowledge, the continuity of a bloodline, and the preservation of secrets that could transform how humanity understood its past. The tension between public duty and private legacy, between human frailty and the weight of cosmic responsibility, adds a layer of depth and drama to the story of the Merovingians, making their rituals not just acts of ceremony but acts of courage, foresight, and defiance. Through these ceremonies, the Merovingians bridged time, space, and civilizations. They transformed ordinary acts into carriers of hidden meaning, embedding the memory of lost knowledge into their very lives. Rituals, then, were the living language of the bloodline, the medium through which ancient wisdom survived, and the silent witness to the extraordinary legacy of a dynasty that may have preserved secrets from a world lost beneath the waves, waiting for those perceptive enough to understand. Artifacts and relics form the tangible backbone of any hidden legacy, and for the Merovingians, they were more than objects. They were vessels of memory, encoded with knowledge that spanned centuries and perhaps even civilizations long lost to the sea. Coins, crowns, swords, manuscripts, and ceremonial vessels were meticulously crafted, each bearing symbols, patterns, and alignments that could encode complex information. To the untrained eye, these items appeared as decorative, ceremonial, or simply valuable. To those initiated into the lineage, each artifact was a cipher, a repository of secrets, and a means of preserving connections to Lemuria, a civilization whose wisdom might have influenced human history in ways ordinary chronicles would never admit. Coins are a striking example. At first glance, they seem like ordinary currency, minted to assert political authority and facilitate trade. Yet closer inspection reveals the deliberate placement of symbols, spirals, stars, serpents, that echo motifs found across Merovingian crowns, manuscripts, and sacred architecture. These patterns were not merely ornamental. They were intentional codes, transmitting ancestral knowledge through an everyday medium. As coins circulated throughout the kingdom, fragments of encoded memory traveled with them, subtly reinforcing the dynasty's influence while safeguarding information from outsiders. In this way, even the smallest artifact became a living archive, bridging commerce, power, and secret wisdom. Crowns, too, were more than ceremonial. The Merovingian long-haired kings often wore crowns that incorporated spirals, crescents, and celestial patterns, each element deliberately positioned to convey hidden meaning. Some researchers suggest that the alignment of these symbols may have corresponded with astronomical phenomena or cycles, connecting the wearer to cosmic rhythms that mirrored those of Lemuria. Beyond symbolism, crowns were considered vessels of authority and knowledge, worn only by those initiated into the mysteries of the bloodline. They were physical manifestations of a secret language, a fusion of power, ritual, and encoded memory. Swords and ceremonial weapons carried dual significance. They were instruments of war and protection, yes, but they were also symbolic tools in ritual contexts. Some accounts describe the swords being inscribed with esoteric symbols or ancient scripts that guided ceremonial use or encoded protective knowledge. Their shapes, edges, and proportions were carefully calibrated, perhaps to align with geomantic principles or celestial patterns. These artifacts were designed not merely to preserve physical power but to act as conduits of intelligence, preserving lessons, wisdom, and secrets from past civilizations, including Lemuria, whose advanced understanding of the natural and cosmic world may have influenced Merovingian design. Manuscripts and codices were equally important, though often more vulnerable. Monks and scholars under the Merovingians recorded texts in ways that preserved encoded knowledge while appearing innocuous to outsiders. Diagrams, allegorical illustrations, and symbolic marginalia carried instructions, genealogical data, and ritual guidance. Some texts hint at navigation to remote lands, the timing of celestial events, or techniques of observation and meditation inherited from ancient civilizations. By embedding meaning in visual, symbolic, and allegorical forms, these manuscripts could survive centuries of scrutiny, censorship, and destruction while safeguarding secrets that could illuminate the forgotten world of Lemuria. Ceremonial vessels, cups, bowls, and reliquaries were also integral to the dynasty's ritual practice. These items were often adorned with intricate motifs, inscriptions, and patterns that mirrored those found in manuscripts, coins, and crowns. They were used in rites that preserved memory, symbolically connecting the living dynasty to ancestors, cosmic forces, and potentially the wisdom of lost civilizations. The act of using the vessel in ritual, of pouring, offering, or drinking, was itself a transmission of encoded knowledge, an interaction that reinforced continuity and ensured the secret remained alive across generations. The placement and movement of artifacts were also critical. Sacred objects were hidden in palaces, buried beneath altars, or stored within monasteries that functioned as guardians of knowledge. Some artifacts were deliberately placed in locations aligned with natural features or celestial points, creating a hidden map of power and memory across Europe. These placements were not random. They mirrored geomantic principles, astronomical knowledge, and the encoded wisdom of Lemuria, ensuring that the artifacts themselves became part of a larger network of hidden knowledge. The secrecy surrounding these objects was paramount. Many were deliberately concealed from public view or from authorities such as the Church, which might have misinterpreted or confiscated them. Trusted custodians, family members, allies, or initiated priests ensured that artifacts remained within the lineage, used only in ritual or symbolic acts. The Merovingians' meticulous care in preserving these objects highlights the extraordinary value they placed on knowledge, continuity, and secrecy, elevating mundane objects into powerful instruments of memory and influence. Some of the most mysterious artifacts are those whose origins hint directly at Lemuria. Fragmentary accounts, cryptic descriptions, and unusual craftsmanship suggest objects that predate European civilization as we know it. Certain ceremonial bowls, engraved stones, and metalwork exhibit patterns and motifs that appear elsewhere in accounts of sunken continents. Could these objects have been brought to Europe through trade, migration, or intentional preservation by the Merovingians? If so, the dynasty was not merely inheriting local authority. They were custodians of knowledge that may have spanned oceans and millennia, linking the bloodline to civilizations erased from the surface of the earth. Artifacts also played a role in teaching and initiation. Young members of the bloodline were trained to interpret objects, understand their symbolic significance, and participate in rituals that reinforced memory and cosmic connection. In this sense, every object was both educational and ceremonial, embedding lessons in tangible form. Unlike texts alone, artifacts created a multisensory experience. Touch, sight, even sound in the case of bells or instruments, allowing knowledge to be transmitted in ways that survived political upheaval, censorship, or the death of a scribe. Ultimately, the Merovingian artifacts were living witnesses to a hidden history. They testify to a dynasty that saw itself as more than rulers. They were guardians of knowledge, memory, and perhaps even cosmic or lost wisdom. Coins, crowns, swords, manuscripts, and vessels all served to preserve a secret that could survive centuries, communicated through symbols, ritual, and careful placement. Through these tangible objects, we glimpse the profound sophistication of a dynasty whose power was measured not only by armies or land but by its ability to safeguard knowledge that ordinary history has largely forgotten. As we study these relics, we begin to see patterns, a network of meaning, and perhaps a map to the lost world of Lemuria. The artifacts are more than historical curiosities. They are the material evidence of a dynasty's secret mission, a bridge across time connecting kings, civilizations, and knowledge that might otherwise have been lost to the waves of history. Through them, the Merovingians ensured that the wisdom of the past remained alive, preserved in objects that continue to whisper their hidden truths to those willing to see. The Merovingian story is not preserved solely in artifacts or rituals. It also survives in the whispered currents of legend and the enigmatic threads of oral tradition. Long after the chronicles were written, long after coins and crowns were hidden or lost, stories persisted, stories that spoke of kings who were more than human, of bloodlines touched by mystery, and of knowledge inherited from worlds now submerged beneath the waves. These legends are not mere fairy tales. They are coded histories, repositories of memory designed to survive centuries of suppression, censorship, and the passage of time. Each tale carries fragments of truth, hints of secret knowledge, and echoes of civilizations like Lemuria whose existence had been erased from public consciousness. One recurring motif in Merovingian legend is the idea of the divine bloodline. Kings were not only rulers of territory. They were believed to carry an essence, a sacred inheritance that linked them to the origins of humanity itself. In some oral traditions, this bloodline is described as luminous, capable of extraordinary insight, resilience, or even longevity. Chroniclers often dismiss these claims as superstition or exaggeration, but the consistency of such accounts across centuries suggests a deeper truth. The bloodline was more than symbolic. It may have been a vessel for inherited knowledge, memory, and responsibility. To the people who told these stories, and perhaps to the initiates themselves, this lineage represented a bridge between the known world and something far older, something lost yet not forgotten. Stories of kings undertaking secret quests, surviving impossible journeys, and recovering lost wisdom abound in Merovingian lore. Legends describe voyages across oceans to retrieve sacred texts or artifacts, encounters with mysterious guardians, and the discovery of knowledge that could transform kingdoms. These narratives are often couched in allegory, kings crossing perilous seas, navigating stormy waters, or discovering islands that vanish with the morning tide. But beneath the allegory lies a persistent theme. The Merovingians were seekers of hidden truths, protectors of knowledge inherited from lands and civilizations lost to time, including Lemuria. Every tale functions both as entertainment and as a vessel for encoded memory, ensuring that lessons survived even when written records were destroyed. The use of coded language in oral tradition is particularly striking. Certain phrases, metaphors, or story structures repeat across generations, each carrying multiple layers of meaning. A king walking through fire may be a literal reference to a dangerous journey, a metaphor for spiritual trial, or an encoded instruction for interpreting a map or symbol. The river that flows backward could represent a lost continent, a hidden archive, or a ritual cycle that aligns with celestial events. Listeners who were trained in the tradition would understand these layers. Outsiders would hear only story and spectacle. This duality, obvious to the uninitiated, hidden to the initiated, is a hallmark of Merovingian legend, reflecting the dynasty's ongoing strategy of encoding knowledge in ways that survive suppression, censorship, and time itself. Myths also reinforced the spiritual and cosmic dimensions of the bloodline. Some tales describe kings communing with celestial forces, interpreting signs in the stars, or receiving guidance from ancestors whose wisdom transcended mortality. These stories are consistent with what we know of Merovingian ritual practice: alignment with celestial events, encoded symbols, and sacred timing. Myth becomes a form of instruction, teaching initiates how to observe the world, decode symbols, and navigate both terrestrial and cosmic landscapes. In this way, legend and ritual were intertwined, each reinforcing the other, preserving knowledge in multiple forms simultaneously. Certain recurring symbols in legend are particularly telling. The serpent, the spiral, the star, the sun, and the crescent appear in tales as often as they appear in artifacts and manuscripts. Serpents are described as guides, protectors, or challengers, often guarding knowledge or testing the worthiness of a king. Spirals represent cycles of time or hidden paths, Stars and celestial bodies serve as maps, markers, or reminders of cosmic order. The repetition of these symbols across stories, rituals, and material culture suggests a coherent system of meaning, a network of encoded knowledge that transcends medium, geography, and time. Oral traditions also preserve genealogical memory. Beyond tales of heroism or divine inheritance, stories frequently reference ancestors, lineages, and connections to other families or even distant civilizations. Some accounts hint at relations between the Merovingians and mysterious cultures across the seas, possibly remnants of Lemuria or other lost lands. These stories serve as living genealogies, preserving knowledge about heritage, legitimacy, and sacred responsibility. In a world where written records could be destroyed, oral transmission ensured continuity, safeguarding not only identity but also encoded wisdom and maps to hidden knowledge. The emotional dimension of these legends is equally important. Tales of betrayal, courage, sacrifice, and perseverance underscore the human stakes of preserving the bloodline and its knowledge. Kings face impossible odds, enemies who seek to destroy them, and natural forces that threaten both life and legacy. These narratives evoke awe, fear, and admiration, connecting listeners emotionally to the dynasty and its mission. In doing so, legend becomes not only a record of knowledge but also a tool for sustaining loyalty, faith, and the psychological resilience required to protect secrets across generations. The interplay between legend and secrecy is further reinforced by intentional ambiguity. Stories often conclude with open-ended questions, vanished kings, or mysteries unsolved, leaving listeners to ponder meaning, speculate on hidden truths, and pass on their interpretations. This method ensures that the audience participates in the preservation of knowledge, reinforcing memory through engagement. Even centuries later, modern scholars and enthusiasts are drawn into the same act of interpretation, decoding fragments and symbols, piecing together the network of history, myth, and hidden wisdom that defines the Merovingian legacy. Ultimately, the legends and oral traditions of the Merovingians form a living archive. They preserve knowledge, encode memory, and maintain continuity in a form that is resilient, adaptable, and deeply human. They demonstrate that history is not solely written in manuscripts or etched in stone. It lives in stories, gestures, and voices passed from generation to generation. Through these narratives, the Merovingians ensured that even when physical artifacts were hidden, destroyed, or lost, the essence of their legacy, perhaps even the knowledge of lost civilizations like Lemuria, would survive. By examining these legends, we glimpse the intersection of myth, history, and memory, and the extraordinary measures a dynasty took to protect what was most precious. They remind us that truth can be encoded in story, that knowledge can survive in allegory, and that even civilizations lost to the ocean or to time can leave traces in human memory, waiting for those who dare to listen. The Merovingians' legends are not merely entertaining. They are the threads of a hidden tapestry, connecting kings, bloodlines, artifacts, rituals, and perhaps even continents long forgotten beneath the waves. Astronomy was far more than a science for the Merovingians. It was a sacred language, a cosmic code that linked the dynasty to the heavens, to ancestral knowledge, and perhaps even to the lost civilization of Lemuria. While ordinary rulers relied on calendars to plan festivals and agricultural work, the Merovingians observed the sky with a meticulousness that bordered on reverence. They tracked the movements of stars, the cycles of the moon, and the subtle shifts of planets, interpreting these celestial patterns as signs, guides, and confirmations of their hidden wisdom. Their rituals, journeys, and artifacts were often synchronized with these cosmic rhythms, creating a profound connection between earthly events and celestial order. The most striking evidence of this knowledge lies in the alignment of ceremonial sites, temples, and burial grounds. Certain Merovingian palaces and sacred locations are positioned in ways that correspond with solstices, equinoxes, and key stellar positions. These alignments were not accidental. They suggest a deliberate intention to harmonize the dynasty's power with cosmic forces, as though the kings were conduits through which universal knowledge flowed into the earthly realm. Some historians have speculated that these observations were used to time rituals that preserved or activated secret wisdom, linking the physical world to cycles and patterns that predated recorded history. Celestial observation was also integrated into the dynasty's symbolic language. Stars, crescents, and planetary symbols recur in crowns, coins, manuscripts, and artifacts. The repetition of these motifs across mediums suggests that the Merovingians encoded astronomical knowledge into their material culture. Certain stars may have functioned as markers, indicating the timing of rituals, sacred journeys, or the retrieval of lost knowledge. Spirals, often interpreted as temporal or cosmic cycles, may have represented the motion of planets or the recurring positions of celestial bodies, embedding practical astronomical understanding into visual symbolism. The training of heirs in celestial observation was rigorous. Young princes were taught to read the sky, to recognize constellations, and to interpret subtle shifts in the heavens. This knowledge was not mere decoration. It was functional, guiding the timing of rituals, journeys, and secret ceremonies. Some accounts suggest that kings were trained to correlate celestial events with earthly signs, a practice that required acute observation and deep understanding of patterns across time. This education positioned the Merovingians as both rulers and guardians of a wisdom that was simultaneously terrestrial, celestial, and perhaps even cosmic. The connection between astronomy and ritual is particularly fascinating. Many ceremonies were performed only at specific times, corresponding to celestial events such as lunar phases, solstices, or the rising of particular stars. These moments were believed to hold special energy, capable of amplifying the effects of ritual, connecting the practitioner to ancestors, or activating the power encoded in sacred objects. The timing of these rituals ensured that the dynasty's knowledge was synchronized with the universe itself, a reflection of a worldview in which earthly authority was inseparable from cosmic order. Astronomical knowledge also guided exploration and travel. When the Merovingians embarked on secret journeys, they relied on the stars to navigate both physical and symbolic landscapes. Legends describe voyages to distant lands or hidden islands, guided by celestial markers and interpreted through encoded maps or oral instruction. These journeys were carefully planned, with departures timed according to the positions of stars or planets, ensuring that the dynasty's expeditions were aligned with cosmic forces. In this sense, astronomy was both a practical tool and a spiritual guide, essential to the preservation and expansion of hidden knowledge. Certain celestial motifs may also link the Merovingians to Lemuria. Ancient texts and legends describe stars or constellations visible in a time when continents were positioned differently, suggesting that some astronomical knowledge may predate recorded European history. The recurrence of specific stellar patterns in Merovingian manuscripts, crowns, and artifacts hints at inherited understanding from civilizations that observed the sky in ways lost to modern knowledge. Whether this knowledge originated in Lemuria, transmitted through migration or memory, or developed independently, its preservation within the bloodline underscores the dynasty's extraordinary commitment to safeguarding wisdom that transcended ordinary temporal and spatial boundaries. The emotional and philosophical dimensions of Merovingian astronomy are equally compelling. Kings and initiates were acutely aware of their place in the cosmos, trained to perceive the interconnectedness of events, objects, and celestial forces. This understanding fostered a sense of responsibility, awe, and humility. To misinterpret the heavens was not merely an error. It was a potential disruption of ritual, a misalignment of knowledge, and a threat to the continuity of the bloodline. Observation of the sky was therefore both a practical discipline and a spiritual practice, reinforcing the dynasty's sense of purpose, legacy, and connection to a history that extended beyond the visible world. Moreover, astronomical knowledge shaped political and ceremonial authority. By aligning their actions with celestial events, the Merovingians reinforced their image as divinely guided rulers, capable of interpreting signs inaccessible to ordinary people. This perception strengthened loyalty, inspired awe, and created a subtle but powerful influence over both nobility and commoners. Symbols and timing became tools of persuasion, demonstrating that the dynasty's authority was not merely inherited but cosmically sanctioned, a bridge between the human and the divine, between history and hidden memory. Even mundane observations were ritualized. Changes in the moon, the appearance of comets, or the subtle movement of planets were meticulously recorded, discussed in council, and sometimes incorporated into ceremonial acts. These observations were layered into the dynasty's symbolic system, often encoded in manuscript diagrams, ceremonial patterns, or ritual sequences. Knowledge of the heavens became inseparable from ritual, governance, and the preservation of the bloodline, ensuring that the Merovingians' understanding of cosmic order remained both practical and secret. Ultimately, the Merovingians' astronomical practice was a multidimensional system. It connected observation, ritual, artifact, and journey, creating a web of knowledge that linked the dynasty to cosmic order, ancestral wisdom, and lost civilizations. Through careful alignment with the heavens, the kings ensured that their rituals, symbols, and journeys resonated with forces beyond ordinary perception, safeguarding knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. Astronomy was both a map and a key, guiding rulers through physical landscapes, spiritual paths, and hidden histories alike. By studying these connections, we glimpse the Merovingians not merely as kings of Gaul but as custodians of a vast, hidden network of knowledge. Their understanding of the stars was practical, spiritual, and encoded, linking the bloodline to both celestial and terrestrial history. It suggests a civilization that saw itself as part of a cosmic continuum, responsible for preserving knowledge, protecting sacred artifacts, and maintaining the continuity of memory across centuries. The sky, then, was not just a backdrop to their reign. It was a living archive, a guide, and a witness to the hidden legacy of a dynasty whose secrets may reach back to lands and civilizations long submerged beneath the oceans. Power, for the Merovingians, was never solely territorial or military. It was embedded in blood, alliances, and the careful orchestration of lineage. The dynasty's longevity and survival owed as much to strategic relationships as to kingship itself. From early on, marriages were not merely personal or political acts. They were deliberate instruments for consolidating power, preserving secrets, and safeguarding knowledge passed through the bloodline. Royal unions were meticulously calculated, intended to protect the integrity of the lineage, strengthen claims to sacred knowledge, and ensure that wisdom inherited from lost civilizations like Lemuria remained in trusted hands. Political alliances were equally deliberate. The Merovingians understood that knowledge alone was insufficient without a network of allies capable of defending it. Nobles, priests, and distant rulers who demonstrated loyalty, or at least strategic usefulness, were integrated into a complex web of relationships that reinforced the dynasty's authority. These alliances often transcended borders, connecting Gaul to other European realms, Mediterranean powers, and even distant trade networks. Each connection carried dual significance. Outwardly, it consolidated influence and power. Inwardly, it created channels for the discreet transmission of information, ensuring that secrets could travel safely beyond the immediate realm of the dynasty. Marriages were central to this strategy. Daughters and sons were married into families whose loyalty could be trusted, creating networks of protection and custodianship. These unions were often accompanied by detailed agreements about inheritance, ritual practice, and the transmission of knowledge. Some accounts suggest that certain families were initiated into the esoteric traditions of the Merovingians, trained to act as custodians of artifacts, manuscripts, and ceremonial secrets. In this way, bloodline alliances functioned as more than social contracts. They were mechanisms for preserving and expanding hidden wisdom across generations. The careful orchestration of bloodlines also extended to the question of succession. Merovingian kings were acutely aware of the vulnerabilities inherent in dynastic continuity. Rival claims, illegitimate heirs, or misaligned marriages could compromise the preservation of knowledge. To mitigate risk, succession plans were meticulously managed, often involving multiple heirs, ceremonial training, and secret instructions to ensure that knowledge and authority remained aligned. In some cases, heirs were groomed in isolation, trained in ritual, celestial observation, and symbolic interpretation before assuming public roles. These measures ensured that even under political upheaval, the integrity of the bloodline's hidden wisdom could survive. Alliances were not always peaceful. Diplomatic marriages were often accompanied by intrigue, subterfuge, and calculated risk. Some unions were forged to neutralize rivals, absorb opposition, or mask the true purpose of strategic relationships. Beneath the public display of ceremony, treaties, and celebrations, the dynasty wove a network of observation, surveillance, and coded communication. Spouses, nobles, and foreign allies could act as both protectors and informants, ensuring that secrets remained in trusted hands while external threats were monitored and mitigated. In this way, political maneuvering was inseparable from the preservation of hidden knowledge. The Merovingians also leveraged alliances to secure the transmission of ceremonial and ritual practices. Certain families, monasteries, and scholars were entrusted with aspects of esoteric knowledge, ensuring that even if the dynasty's direct line faced disruption, the wisdom could survive. These alliances created a distributed network of custodianship, protecting knowledge from political upheaval, external interference, or natural disaster. The careful placement of allies within religious institutions, courts, and foreign realms meant that the dynasty's secrets could be both guarded and subtly transmitted, expanding their influence while maintaining discretion. Religious alliances were particularly critical. By aligning with monasteries, abbeys, and influential clerics, the Merovingians ensured that certain sacred sites could serve dual purposes, as centers of spiritual authority and as hidden repositories of knowledge. Monks, trained in both religious practice and secret observation, could act as guardians of manuscripts, artifacts, and ritual instruction. These religious alliances were not merely political. They were strategic instruments for survival, safeguarding the dynasty's legacy while providing a veneer of legitimacy and devotion to the church, a careful balancing act in a world where ecclesiastical scrutiny could turn dangerous very quickly. Some alliances were forged with distant or exotic realms. Trade routes, diplomatic missions, and marriage ties extended across Europe and into regions where knowledge from lost civilizations could be found or preserved. These connections provided access to manuscripts, artifacts, and oral traditions unavailable in Gaul, enriching the Merovingian reservoir of knowledge. In some cases, alliances enabled the dynasty to acquire objects or texts that might have originated in Lemuria or other lost cultures, integrating them into ritual practice and embedding them within the bloodline's continuity. The scope of these networks suggests a level of strategic foresight rarely acknowledged in conventional histories. Yet these alliances were not merely practical. They carried profound symbolic and emotional weight. By forging ties through marriage and kinship, the Merovingians created a sense of shared destiny, loyalty, and responsibility among the elite. Allies were not only political partners but participants in a covenant to protect knowledge, uphold ritual practice, and safeguard the lineage. This sense of shared duty reinforced cohesion, even in times of conflict, and created a network of trust capable of surviving centuries of upheaval. The bonds formed through these relationships were as much about spiritual and cultural continuity as they were about temporal power. The careful orchestration of alliances and bloodlines also reveals the dynasty's understanding of perception and secrecy. Outsiders often interpreted marriages, treaties, and alliances as ordinary political maneuvers, unaware that these actions were part of a far deeper strategy designed to protect secrets and extend the dynasty's influence over both knowledge and territory. Every union, every treaty, and every alliance carried dual layers of meaning, one visible and public, the other hidden and esoteric. This duality is a recurring theme in Merovingian strategy, demonstrating that the dynasty's survival depended not only on physical power but on the careful management of perception, trust, and encoded knowledge. Ultimately, the Merovingians' mastery of alliances and bloodline strategy ensured that knowledge, ritual, and heritage could survive even in times of political upheaval, succession crises, or external threats. By integrating trusted allies into both their familial and political networks, the dynasty created a living, distributed system of custodianship. Knowledge was not concentrated in a single palace or family member but dispersed through a carefully managed network, ensuring redundancy, resilience, and continuity. In this way, the dynasty's political and familial strategies were inseparable from its mission to protect, preserve, and transmit hidden wisdom. The interplay of alliances, marriage, and bloodline reveals the Merovingians as far more sophisticated than conventional histories suggest. They were not merely kings. They were architects of networks, guardians of knowledge, and strategists of survival. Their careful orchestration of relationships ensured that their secrets, knowledge of celestial patterns, ritual practices, sacred artifacts, and perhaps even wisdom from Lemuria, remained intact across generations. The dynasty's enduring influence, both visible and hidden, owes as much to these networks as to swords, crowns, or territories, reflecting a vision of power that combined politics, ritual, and secrecy into a unified strategy for survival. The Merovingians did not operate in isolation. Beneath the surface of European politics and history, a network of secret societies, esoteric orders, and mystical traditions thrived, and the dynasty maintained carefully cultivated relationships with many of them. These interactions were rarely documented openly, yet hints and fragmentary records suggest a complex web of alliances, collaborations, and cautious rivalries that extended the reach of Merovingian influence far beyond Gaul. In this hidden world, the dynasty was not merely a ruling family. It was a node in a network of knowledge, guarding secrets, sharing wisdom selectively, and leveraging esoteric connections to preserve its legacy and expand its hidden power. One of the most intriguing aspects of these relationships is the exchange of knowledge. The Merovingians were custodians of wisdom encoded in ritual, artifact, and celestial observation, while secret societies often possessed complementary knowledge of alchemy, sacred geometry, ancient languages, and hidden histories. Interaction between these groups allowed the dynasty to reinforce its own understanding, acquire new methods of safeguarding knowledge, and secure allies who could act as both interpreters and protectors of their secrets. These exchanges were subtle, occurring through carefully orchestrated ceremonies, private audiences, and the transmission of coded manuscripts, ensuring that information flowed without exposure to the uninitiated. Orders such as the early precursors to what would later become Templar or Rosicrucian traditions may have intersected with the Merovingians in ways that blurred the line between myth and history. These groups shared an interest in hidden knowledge, sacred relics, and spiritual authority, and the dynasty's relationships with them were carefully calibrated to protect its assets while gaining access to wider networks of influence. Initiation rites, cryptic symbolism, and shared rituals created a bond of trust and secrecy, allowing both the Merovingians and their allies to safeguard knowledge across generations. The dynasty's skill lay in knowing whom to trust, when to reveal information, and how to integrate the practices of other esoteric traditions into its own system of secrecy. Communication with these secret societies was often encoded. Messages, symbols, and gestures conveyed meaning that could be understood only by those initiated into the network. Manuscripts might contain marginalia with symbolic codes, coins could bear hidden sigils, and ritual acts themselves served as a form of correspondence, demonstrating alignment with shared principles. Even alliances were formalized in subtle ways, with ceremonies or covenants that were invisible to outsiders yet binding in a spiritual or symbolic sense. This web of communication allowed the Merovingians to interact across distances, maintain influence, and expand their reach without exposing the core of their knowledge to external scrutiny. Artifacts and sacred objects played a central role in these interactions. Certain relics, whether ceremonial vessels, engraved stones, or texts, acted as physical evidence of trust and alignment between the Merovingians and other esoteric groups. By exchanging or revealing these items selectively, the dynasty signaled both its authority and its commitment to preserving knowledge. Some artifacts may even have originated outside of Europe, perhaps tied to remnants of Lemuria or other ancient civilizations, adding layers of complexity and value to these exchanges. The careful handling of these objects ensured that trust was reinforced while secrets remained protected. The spiritual and ritual dimension of these interactions cannot be overstated. Esoteric societies often placed significant emphasis on initiation, symbolism, and ceremonial alignment, and the Merovingians were masters in these practices. Shared rituals may have included the observation of celestial phenomena, the performance of rites with sacred objects, or the recitation of coded chants. Participation in such ceremonies was not merely performative. It created bonds of secrecy, reinforced alignment of purpose, and ensured that knowledge remained both living and dynamic. The dynasty's ability to navigate these rituals, sometimes in collaboration, sometimes in competition, was a key element of its resilience and enduring influence. Political and strategic considerations were also embedded within these interactions. Alliances with secret societies offered the Merovingians protection, intelligence, and leverage in a volatile Europe. Certain groups acted as intermediaries or messengers, conveying information discreetly and creating channels of influence that bypassed conventional political structures. At the same time, the dynasty could use its esoteric connections to assert authority, manage rivals, and shape perception, presenting itself as not merely a ruling family but a custodian of hidden wisdom that transcended ordinary power. This interplay of secrecy, influence, and strategy reinforced the dynasty's capacity to survive upheavals, invasions, and internal conflict. Rivalry and caution were always present. Just as the Merovingians collaborated with some secret societies, they also had to remain vigilant against others who might seek to exploit or expose their knowledge. Trust was conditional, guarded, and continuously evaluated. Stories hint at intrigue, betrayal, and even violent measures taken to protect the dynasty's secrets, illustrating the stakes involved. The Merovingians' engagement with other esoteric groups was therefore a delicate balance, a negotiation of power, secrecy, and mutual benefit, conducted with extraordinary discretion and strategic foresight. Legends surrounding these interactions hint at extraordinary consequences. Some accounts describe the exchange of knowledge that could alter understanding of the natural world, advance ritual sophistication, or provide insight into hidden continents and ancient civilizations. Manuscripts, celestial charts, and coded artifacts were shared selectively, often with conditions, oaths, or ceremonial reinforcement to ensure their proper use. These exchanges suggest a network of knowledge that was both wide and deep, connecting the Merovingians not only to Europe but potentially to fragments of global memory that survived in scattered, hidden repositories. The emotional and human dimension of these alliances is equally compelling. Initiates, scholars, and allies were not merely instruments of political power. They were participants in a shared mission, bound by loyalty, secrecy, and the understanding of what was at stake. The dynasty's success depended on these human relationships as much as on ritual or artifact. Trust, fear, courage, and loyalty were all intertwined with the preservation of knowledge, creating a high-stakes environment in which every decision carried moral, spiritual, and political consequences. Ultimately, the Merovingians' interactions with secret societies highlight a dynasty that was far more sophisticated than conventional histories acknowledge. They were not merely rulers of Gaul. They were orchestrators of networks of knowledge, guardians of artifacts, and participants in esoteric traditions that extended across Europe and beyond. Their ability to integrate, negotiate, and protect these connections ensured that their secrets, whether ritualistic, celestial, or tied to lost civilizations like Lemuria, remained intact. Through these interactions, the dynasty expanded both its influence and its capacity to preserve wisdom, creating a legacy that is only partially visible to history but resonates in legend, artifact, and the hidden record of esoteric knowledge. In the end, the Merovingians' engagement with secret societies was a testament to strategic foresight, spiritual sophistication, and extraordinary patience. It was a recognition that survival depended not merely on armies or alliances of convenience, but on a careful network of trust, secrecy, and shared purpose. By navigating this hidden world, the dynasty ensured that its knowledge, artifacts, and ritual power could persist across generations, leaving traces that continue to intrigue, mystify, and challenge our understanding of history today. The Merovingians' mastery of secrecy and strategy was not limited to rituals, alliances, or celestial observation. They were also warriors, tacticians, and masters of covert operations, employing both the sword and subtle subterfuge to protect their knowledge, artifacts, and lineage. Battles were not only fought over territory or political dominance. They were fought to safeguard hidden wisdom, ensure the continuity of sacred bloodlines, and protect relics that carried knowledge of lost civilizations like Lemuria. Every campaign, siege, and skirmish was layered with purpose, strategy, and, often, secrecy beyond the comprehension of ordinary chroniclers. One striking example is the protection of sacred artifacts during wartime. When enemy forces threatened Merovingian lands, select objects were deliberately hidden, sometimes in underground vaults, remote monasteries, or even in secret locations known only to the king and a handful of trusted allies. Some items were concealed within everyday objects, buried beneath altars, or transported under the guise of trade. These measures were taken with precision and foresight, reflecting a profound understanding that the survival of knowledge could be more critical than the outcome of a battle. Protecting a sacred vessel or manuscript could mean preserving centuries of wisdom, encoded knowledge, and ritual power. The dynasty's military campaigns often carried dual objectives. While armies engaged in conventional warfare, select units operated in secrecy, tasked with recovering lost artifacts, securing hidden sites, or eliminating threats to the bloodline's esoteric legacy. These covert operations required careful planning, intelligence gathering, and a deep understanding of geography, human behavior, and enemy strategy. Success depended on precision, discipline, and a level of secrecy that ensured ordinary soldiers, or even commanders, remained unaware of the full scope of the mission. In many cases, history records only the outward victory, masking the deeper purpose of these actions. The safeguarding of hidden wisdom. Sieges, too, were carefully orchestrated. While the public record might describe sieges in terms of military conquest, closer examination suggests that certain fortresses and cities were targeted because they held repositories of knowledge, sacred relics, or loyal custodians. The capture or defense of these locations was often crucial to maintaining the integrity of the bloodline's secrets. Chronicles that survive often obscure these motives, framing conflicts as dynastic disputes or territorial expansion. Yet the careful placement of loyal monks, trusted allies, and coded markers indicates a more nuanced strategy, one in which survival, secrecy, and the protection of ancient wisdom were paramount. The Merovingians were also adept at psychological strategy. Rumors, misinformation, and carefully staged events were employed to mislead enemies and protect valuable knowledge. Feints, false retreats, and symbolic displays of weakness were often tactical measures designed to conceal the dynasty's true objectives. By controlling perception, the Merovingians ensured that potential threats underestimated their capabilities or misunderstood their motives. This psychological dimension of warfare was as vital as any sword or fortification, safeguarding secrets while preserving the dynasty's outward appearance of power or vulnerability. Naval operations, though less documented, played a role in the dynasty's protection of hidden knowledge. Certain coastal sites, rivers, and trade routes were critical for transporting sacred artifacts, manuscripts, or trained custodians. Control of these waterways allowed the Merovingians to move treasures discreetly, evade enemy surveillance, and maintain networks of communication with distant allies. Some legends even hint at secret voyages to remote lands, guided by celestial markers, to recover or safeguard knowledge from lost civilizations. While such expeditions are often dismissed as myth, they align with the dynasty's broader strategy of blending secrecy, ritual, and tactical precision in the service of preserving hidden wisdom. The human element of these battles was also significant. Warriors, custodians, and trusted allies were bound by oaths, rituals, and shared understanding of the stakes. Loyalty was reinforced through initiation, ceremonial instruction, and the knowledge that failure could result not only in personal loss, but in the destruction of centuries of preserved wisdom. These psychological bonds created elite units capable of extraordinary courage, discipline, and strategic insight. Soldiers were not only fighting for territory, they were defending knowledge, protecting sacred bloodlines, and participating in a mission that connected them to cosmic and ancestral forces. Even the geography of conflict was chosen with hidden purpose. Certain landscapes, forests, hills, rivers, and sacred sites were used strategically to conceal movement, secure ritual spaces, or protect artifacts. Knowledge of terrain was combined with coded observation of celestial events to plan operations with precision. Battles were conducted not only in the physical realm but also in a symbolic one, where alignment with cosmic forces, ritual timing, and environmental awareness could determine the outcome of missions critical to the preservation of the dynasty's hidden legacy. The secrecy of these operations was often enforced with ruthless efficiency. Those who threatened to reveal the location of sacred artifacts, the timing of rituals, or the methods of covert operations were sometimes removed quietly, leaving little trace. Loyalty, discretion, and obedience were paramount. Failure to adhere to these principles could imperil not only the individual but the dynasty's broader mission. In this sense, warfare was not merely a public spectacle but a hidden system of checks, codes, and consequences, ensuring that the Merovingians' secret knowledge remained protected through generations of conflict. The Merovingians also understood the symbolic power of battle. Victory was not always measured in territory gained or enemies vanquished. It could also be a signal to allies, rivals, and custodians of knowledge that the dynasty remained capable, vigilant, and in alignment with cosmic and ancestral forces. Public displays of martial prowess, ceremonial triumphs, or staged conflicts often masked the true purpose of the operation, reinforcing authority while protecting secrets. Every battle was therefore both practical and symbolic, layered with meaning, strategy, and purpose beyond immediate perception. Interestingly, some historical accounts suggest that the dynasty's enemies recognized, at least partially, the connection between Merovingian power and hidden knowledge. Chroniclers hint at rival factions attempting to seize manuscripts, relics, or secret sites, understanding that the dynasty's influence was tied not only to military strength but to the control of wisdom, ritual practice, and esoteric authority. These attempts often failed, suggesting that the Merovingians' blend of conventional and covert strategies was exceptionally effective, allowing the dynasty to survive both visible and hidden threats. Ultimately, the Merovingians' approach to warfare reveals a dynasty operating on multiple levels simultaneously. Battles were not just physical confrontations, they were strategic operations designed to protect knowledge, artifacts, and bloodlines. Every siege, skirmish, and covert mission was orchestrated with careful attention to secrecy, ritual, and symbolic meaning. The dynasty's mastery of these techniques ensured that even under extreme duress, the essence of Merovingian power, its wisdom, artifacts, and sacred bloodline, remained intact. Through these military campaigns and covert operations, the Merovingians demonstrated a remarkable understanding of the interplay between visible power and hidden knowledge. They recognized that survival required more than armies and fortresses. It demanded intelligence, foresight, ritual precision, and the protection of secrets that extended beyond the visible world. In this light, the dynasty's history of warfare is not merely a record of battles. It is a testament to the extraordinary lengths to which the Merovingians went to preserve a legacy that was as much cosmic and esoteric as it was earthly. For the Merovingians, knowledge was power, but knowledge in the wrong hands could be lethal. Beyond the visible realms of kingship, alliances, and armies, the dynasty relied on an intricate network of espionage and secret communication to protect their hidden wisdom. Spies, messengers, and covert operatives were as essential as swords or crowns. They ensured that sacred artifacts, manuscripts, and encoded traditions remained concealed, transported safely, and interpreted correctly. These agents operated in shadows, blending into courts, monasteries, marketplaces, and even enemy camps, serving as the unseen guardians of a legacy that spanned centuries and civilizations long forgotten. The network of Merovingian spies was remarkably sophisticated for its time. Operatives were selected for loyalty, discretion, and intelligence. Many were trained in multiple disciplines: cryptography, celestial navigation, symbolic interpretation, and observation of ritual practice. Their role was not only to gather intelligence but to act as intermediaries between branches of the dynasty, allies, and esoteric orders. Each agent understood that their work was part of a larger system designed to preserve knowledge, safeguard artifacts, and maintain continuity of the bloodline. A single error could compromise centuries of preparation, so training was rigorous and initiation ceremonial, binding each operative to the dynasty through oath, ritual, and shared understanding of what was at stake. Messengers, in particular, played a pivotal role. Unlike ordinary couriers, they carried not only letters but also encoded knowledge. Manuscripts might be rolled, hidden in secret compartments, or disguised as mundane documents. Certain messengers memorized sequences of symbols or entire genealogies, transmitting information orally to avoid interception. The very act of delivery was a ritual, timed with celestial cycles or aligned with ceremonial events, ensuring that information arrived intact and could be interpreted correctly. In this way, communication became a living process, combining secrecy, symbolism, and precision to maintain the integrity of the dynasty's hidden legacy. Espionage also extended to monitoring enemies, rivals, and potential threats. Operatives infiltrated courts, religious institutions, and foreign realms, observing movements, intentions, and alliances. By collecting subtle details, gestures, words, or the placement of objects, agents could detect threats to sacred artifacts or secret knowledge. This intelligence was evaluated meticulously, often by multiple trusted advisors, ensuring that the dynasty could respond before danger became immediate. In many cases, espionage was preventive rather than reactive, neutralizing threats before they reached critical levels, a testament to the Merovingian strategic foresight. The methods employed by these operatives were as diverse as they were cunning. Disguises, false identities, and double roles were common. A monk might also be a spy. A merchant could serve as a messenger, carrying encoded artifacts beneath layers of trade goods. Agents were trained to blend into multiple social strata, moving unseen and unnoticed while gathering intelligence critical to the dynasty's survival. This adaptability ensured that no single breach could compromise the network, creating a system of redundancy that preserved knowledge even in turbulent times. Codes and ciphers were integral to espionage. Letters, maps, and manuscripts often contained layered meanings, comprehensible only to those trained in the dynasty's symbolic language. Certain patterns, motifs, or seemingly trivial annotations functioned as keys to understanding, allowing messages to be interpreted correctly even if intercepted. The very design of these codes reflected the Merovingians' deep understanding of human perception, memory, and pattern recognition. An uninitiated observer might see only ornamentation or scribbles, while a trained messenger would recognize complex astronomical, genealogical, or ritual significance. Some operatives were tasked with direct protection of sacred knowledge during transit. They accompanied artifacts, manuscripts, or relics across treacherous routes, evading thieves, rival factions, or inquisitive officials. These journeys were often perilous, requiring both physical skill and mental acuity. Agents needed to understand celestial navigation, recognize hidden markers in the landscape, and maintain secrecy while communicating discreetly with local allies. Success required absolute discipline. Failure could mean loss of sacred objects or exposure of esoteric knowledge to hostile hands. The emotional and psychological dimension of this work was profound. Spies and messengers were acutely aware of their stakes. They were not merely performing a service. They were safeguarding centuries of wisdom, protecting the continuity of the bloodline, and ensuring that rituals, symbols, and celestial knowledge survived intact. Their loyalty, courage, and intelligence were as critical to the dynasty as the swords of the battlefield or the gold of the treasury. Each successful mission reinforced the dynasty's survival, while each failure carried consequences that could ripple across generations. Some espionage missions intersected with covert military operations. Messengers often carried intelligence about enemy movements, secret strongholds, or planned sieges, enabling strategic advantage without overt engagement. In other instances, spies monitored rival dynasties or religious authorities, observing attempts to locate, steal, or interpret Merovingian artifacts. These intelligence operations functioned as both defensive and offensive measures, protecting sacred knowledge while subtly influencing the broader geopolitical landscape. Interestingly, operatives themselves sometimes became guardians of legend. Certain agents were trained to preserve oral traditions, transmit coded stories, and maintain continuity of ritual knowledge. Their role extended beyond espionage into education and ritual instruction, ensuring that even if an artifact was hidden or a manuscript lost, the memory of its significance survived. This dual role of protection and transmission reflects the Merovingians' holistic approach to knowledge. It was physical, symbolic, and living, maintained through both objects and human memory. The system of espionage also fostered a network of trust. Agents were bound by ritual, oath, and shared understanding of cosmic and ancestral responsibility. Trust was reinforced through initiation ceremonies, symbolic markings, and confidential instruction, creating a community whose loyalty was absolute and whose awareness of stakes was profound. This network allowed the dynasty to operate with agility, secrecy, and resilience, ensuring that knowledge could survive both external threats and internal disruption. Ultimately, Merovingian espionage reveals a dynasty that understood knowledge as both treasure and weapon. Swords could defend territory, armies could conquer enemies, but intelligence safeguarded history itself. Agents, messengers, and spies were the dynasty's unseen shield, ensuring that artifacts, manuscripts, and encoded wisdom remained protected, transmitted correctly, and interpreted with precision. Through their work, the Merovingians maintained a delicate balance between concealment and transmission, survival and secrecy, past and future. Through this intricate system, the dynasty ensured continuity across generations, even in the face of betrayal, war, or disaster. Every message carried, every observation recorded, and every coded symbol preserved the bloodline's connection to lost civilizations, sacred rituals, and celestial knowledge. Spies and messengers were more than servants. They were living instruments of preservation, guardians of a legacy that extended beyond Europe, beyond history, and perhaps even beyond time itself. Beneath the surface of the lands ruled by the Merovingians, a hidden world existed, cities, chambers, and subterranean passages carefully designed to conceal the dynasty's most sacred knowledge and invaluable relics. These secret constructions were not mere storage spaces. They were living archives, architectural embodiments of the dynasty's power, wisdom, and cosmic understanding. Often carved into natural caves, hidden beneath palaces, or constructed beneath monasteries and fortresses. These subterranean spaces were a blend of engineering, ritual, and symbolism, reflecting the Merovingians' unparalleled attention to both security and sacred tradition. The very design of these hidden chambers was deliberate, incorporating both physical and symbolic layers of protection. Entrances were concealed, sometimes behind false walls, under heavy stones, or masked by sacred icons. Passageways twisted and turned in ways that disoriented outsiders, while only those with the proper knowledge, ritual sequences, symbols, or celestial cues could navigate them safely. Some chambers were aligned with celestial events, so that at specific times of the year, light from the sun or moon would illuminate key inscriptions, guiding initiates to hidden relics or revealing encoded knowledge. In this way, architecture itself became a guardian, blending secrecy, sacred timing, and coded instruction into a living system of preservation. Artifacts, manuscripts, and relics were stored with meticulous care, often arranged according to principles that combined celestial observation, sacred numerology, and ritual sequence. Objects were not merely hidden. They were placed in relation to one another, creating networks of meaning and power. Certain texts might be positioned to receive light from specific openings at solstices, while sacred vessels could be oriented according to spirals or star alignments. These arrangements reinforced both the practical and spiritual dimensions of the hidden spaces, ensuring that the artifacts were protected while their significance remained encoded for those trained to interpret them. Some subterranean chambers were extraordinarily expansive, stretching beneath entire palaces or monastic complexes. These hidden cities, as they might be called, included rooms for ritual preparation, observation, and the safe storage of sacred objects. Certain corridors served as teaching spaces, where initiates were trained in the interpretation of celestial movements, symbolic codes, and oral traditions. The architecture itself functioned as a mnemonic device, guiding memory, ritual, and understanding through spatial orientation. Movement through these spaces was both practical and symbolic, connecting the initiates to ancestral knowledge and cosmic order. The construction and maintenance of these hidden spaces required not only engineering skill but absolute secrecy. Builders, artisans, and guardians were sworn to strict oaths, often bound through ritual and bloodline allegiance. Knowledge of these spaces was tightly controlled. Even trusted allies might learn only partial information. Some chambers were layered in such a way that false routes, hidden doors, or misleading inscriptions misdirected intruders. In this way, the dynasty ensured that only those deemed worthy could access the most sacred spaces, preserving both secrecy and sanctity. Access to these hidden chambers often required knowledge of ritual and celestial alignment. Certain doors or corridors could be opened only when symbols were traced in a precise sequence or when light fell at a particular angle during a specific time of year. In some cases, access depended on a combination of memorized codes, ceremonial recitations, and precise observation of celestial bodies. This blend of engineering, ritual, and knowledge ensured that the spaces were virtually impervious to casual discovery, transforming architecture into an active guardian of history, wisdom, and sacred legacy. Many hidden spaces also included libraries or repositories of manuscripts. These texts, often written in coded language or obscure alphabets, contained knowledge ranging from celestial observation and ritual practice to genealogical records and esoteric wisdom. Some manuscripts were copies of older works, perhaps tracing back to lost civilizations like Lemuria, encoded to preserve knowledge even if the original sources were destroyed. The careful curation of these texts ensured that successive generations of initiates could continue the work of the dynasty, connecting past wisdom to present practice and future preservation. The emotional and human dimensions of these spaces were profound. For those trained in their use, hidden chambers were not merely storage spaces. They were sacred zones, sites of meditation, learning, and ritual. Initiates experienced awe, fear, and reverence as they navigated labyrinthine corridors, deciphered encoded inscriptions, and interacted with relics of immense power and significance. The very act of entering a hidden chamber was a rite of passage, binding the individual to the dynasty, its knowledge, and its cosmic mission. These experiences reinforced loyalty, respect, and the understanding that the bloodline's legacy was both precious and perilous. Subterranean chambers were also used strategically in times of crisis. When external threats loomed, whether invading armies, rival dynasties, or internal upheaval, artifacts, manuscripts, and even royal heirs could be concealed within these hidden spaces. Some tunnels and chambers connected multiple sites, allowing the discreet movement of people and objects across vast distances. Legends hint at escape routes, secret passages, and subterranean networks that linked palaces, monasteries, and fortresses, creating an invisible infrastructure designed to ensure survival and continuity. Security measures were multifaceted. Hidden alarms, disguised traps, and coded markers were integrated into architecture, artifacts, and inscriptions. Some chambers employed principles of sound, light, or orientation to detect intrusion, while others relied on the knowledge and vigilance of human custodians. Only those who understood the combined system of architecture, symbolism, and ritual could navigate safely. This meticulous design reflects the Merovingians' recognition that the survival of knowledge, artifacts, and bloodline depended on layered protection, blending physical, symbolic, and human elements. Beyond physical protection, these spaces were also symbolic. They embodied the dynasty's worldview, encoding celestial patterns, ancestral memory, and sacred laws into tangible form. Every corridor, chamber, and artifact placement carried meaning, creating a spatial narrative that reflected both historical events and cosmic order. For initiates and custodians, navigating these spaces was an exercise in understanding the interconnectedness of history, ritual, and the natural world, a process that reinforced the dynasty's identity and purpose across generations. Ultimately, Merovingian hidden cities and subterranean chambers reveal a civilization operating at the intersection of engineering, ritual, and esoteric wisdom. These spaces were more than repositories. They were active participants in the preservation of knowledge, guiding initiates, protecting sacred relics, and ensuring continuity of the bloodline. They demonstrate that the Merovingians understood the critical interplay between secrecy, architecture, and ritual, creating a system capable of surviving centuries of political upheaval, warfare, and the passage of time. Through these hidden chambers, the dynasty ensured that its knowledge, artifacts, and legacy remained intact, encoded in both space and ritual. They were living archives, guardians of cosmic and ancestral wisdom, and instruments for transmitting secrets across generations. In the silent darkness beneath palaces and monasteries, the Merovingians wove a network of protection and memory that transcended ordinary history. A secret world that continues to intrigue, mystify, and challenge our understanding of what was possible in the ancient past. The Merovingians understood that knowledge alone was not enough. It required discipline, ritual, and the careful cultivation of the mind and spirit to harness and preserve it. At the heart of this philosophy were the ceremonial practices and esoteric training that shaped the dynasty's heirs from an early age. Princes and princesses were not merely taught to rule. They were initiated into a hidden world of cosmic understanding, sacred ritual, and ancestral memory. Their education combined rigorous intellectual study with spiritual practice, physical discipline, and coded instruction designed to align the individual with both lineage and universe. Initiations were often dramatic, layered with symbolism, and carefully staged to impart both knowledge and emotional resonance. A young heir might be led through labyrinthine chambers, guided by inscriptions, encoded symbols, or the interplay of light and shadow, culminating in a ritual that revealed a sacred artifact or secret text. Each element was designed to challenge perception, instill reverence, and awaken an understanding that authority and wisdom were inseparable. The process was not merely educational. It was transformative, binding the initiate to the dynasty's hidden legacy and cosmic mission. Ceremonial practices were central to this training. The Merovingians placed enormous emphasis on timing, often aligning rituals with celestial events such as solstices, equinoxes, or specific planetary configurations. The movement of stars and the phases of the moon were not abstract. They were practical guides for initiation, dictating when certain rites could be performed and how sacred energy could be harnessed. For the heirs, participation in these ceremonies instilled an understanding of the interconnectedness of human action, cosmic order, and ancestral duty, creating a deep, intuitive sense of alignment with forces beyond the visible world. Rituals often involved objects imbued with history and symbolism. Sacred vessels, manuscripts, and relics played active roles, serving as conduits for knowledge, memory, and power. An initiation might involve handling a ceremonial object whose history traced back centuries, perhaps even to Lemuria or other lost civilizations. The heir's interaction with the object was not merely symbolic. It was an exercise in understanding lineage, continuity, and the transmission of wisdom. Through touch, observation, and precise handling, the young initiate learned the profound significance of safeguarding both material and intangible knowledge. The training of heirs also included esoteric instruction in language, symbolism, and coded knowledge. Manuscripts written in obscure alphabets, symbols embedded in architecture, and ritual sequences encoded in art and ceremonial practice were studied carefully, often under the guidance of a trusted mentor. These lessons were more than intellectual exercises. They were practical skills, teaching the heir to interpret, decode, and preserve hidden knowledge. Understanding the symbols was essential, for misinterpretation could compromise rituals, jeopardize artifacts, or break the continuity of tradition. Physical discipline was equally important. Initiates were often trained in stealth, observation, and spatial awareness, skills necessary to navigate hidden chambers, transport sacred objects, or operate within networks of secrecy. Exercises might involve traversing labyrinthine corridors, responding to subtle cues, or memorizing encoded markers. Physical training was intertwined with ritual and study, creating a holistic form of education that combined body, mind, and spirit. The heirs were shaped not only as rulers but as guardians of knowledge, capable of navigating both earthly and symbolic landscapes. Secrecy was ingrained from the earliest stages of training. Heirs were taught that knowledge could be dangerous if misused or exposed, and that trust must be earned and carefully monitored. Certain lessons were revealed gradually, layered over years, so that understanding deepened in parallel with maturity and experience. This measured approach ensured that the young rulers could carry the weight of knowledge responsibly, safeguarding artifacts, manuscripts, and rituals while making decisions with the wisdom of centuries encoded in their lineage. The emotional intensity of these initiations was deliberate. Awe, fear, reverence, and wonder were cultivated as part of the experience, reinforcing the gravity of the dynasty's mission. Heirs were made aware that their actions carried consequences not only for themselves but for the continuity of knowledge, the preservation of sacred bloodlines, and the cosmic alignment of their rituals. These experiences forged resilience, discipline, and a profound sense of responsibility, ensuring that each ruler understood the stakes of their inheritance in both human and spiritual terms. Mentorship was central to the process. Trusted guides, often experienced initiates, priests, or custodians, provided instruction, supervision, and interpretation. These mentors were themselves deeply embedded in the dynasty's hidden network, trained to convey knowledge selectively, evaluate readiness, and protect secrets. The relationship between mentor and heir was sacred and binding, often reinforced by ritual oaths, symbolic gestures, and shared experience within hidden chambers or ceremonial spaces. This mentorship ensured continuity of teaching and preserved the integrity of the dynasty's esoteric tradition across generations. Some rites of initiation involved the observation and interpretation of celestial phenomena. Stars, planets, and constellations were not merely studied, they were experienced as living guides. Heirs learned to correlate celestial events with terrestrial signs, to use the movement of the heavens as both calendar and cosmic compass. Mastery of this knowledge was critical, as it guided the timing of rituals, journeys, and decisions that maintained alignment between bloodline, artifact, and universe. The lessons were subtle but profound, teaching that power derived not from force alone, but from harmony with cosmic rhythms and ancestral wisdom. The ceremonial use of narrative and legend was also important. Initiates were immersed in stories of ancestors, lost civilizations, and sacred events, often encoded with practical instruction. Legends of Lemuria, secret journeys, and esoteric battles were taught not merely as tales but as living maps of knowledge, guiding heirs in the interpretation of symbols, the handling of artifacts, and the execution of rituals. Storytelling reinforced memory, moral understanding, and the ability to navigate both visible and hidden worlds with discernment. Rituals were often multi-layered, combining sound, light, movement, and spatial orientation to create experiences of profound emotional and spiritual resonance. Initiates might chant, trace symbols, observe light-striking inscriptions, or perform precise movements within hidden chambers. These practices were designed to engage mind, body, and spirit simultaneously, creating lasting impressions that reinforced both knowledge and loyalty. Each layer of ritual added depth, ensuring that understanding was not merely intellectual but lived and internalized. Finally, the esoteric training of heirs reinforced the dynasty's strategic resilience. By embedding knowledge, ritual, and practice into the physical, mental, and spiritual education of rulers, the Merovingians ensured that secrets could survive political upheaval, military defeat, or betrayal. Heirs were equipped to interpret coded manuscripts, perform sacred rites, navigate hidden spaces, and maintain alliances, all while projecting the appearance of ordinary royalty. In this way, ceremonial training was inseparable from governance, survival, and the continuity of the dynasty's hidden legacy. Ultimately, the Merovingians' ritual and esoteric education transformed heirs into living vessels of cosmic, ancestral, and secret knowledge. They were rulers, custodians, and initiates simultaneously, capable of preserving wisdom that transcended ordinary history. Through ceremony, initiation, mentorship, and symbolic practice, each generation of heirs was prepared to carry forward the dynasty's extraordinary legacy, guarding secrets, interpreting cosmic and ancestral guidance, and sustaining a hidden world that continues to intrigue, mystify, and challenge our understanding of history. The Merovingians were more than rulers. They were guardians of objects whose significance transcended ordinary history. Sacred artifacts and relics were the physical embodiment of their power, wisdom, and connection to lost civilizations like Lemuria. These objects were not mere curiosities or symbols. They were instruments of authority, repositories of knowledge, and keys to esoteric practices that had been preserved for centuries. Each artifact carried layers of meaning, encoded rituals, and protective measures, making them invaluable to both the dynasty and the wider network of esoteric allies who recognized their importance. The significance of these artifacts was multifaceted. Some were ceremonial, used in rituals that reinforced the dynasty's connection to cosmic and ancestral forces. Sacred vessels, chalices, and engraved stones might be placed in alignment with celestial events, their presence and orientation enhancing the potency of ritual practice. Others were practical repositories of knowledge, manuscripts encoded with symbols, genealogical charts, or treatises on astronomy and ritual law. Still others served as markers of legitimacy, tangible proof of the dynasty's divine right and continuity, linking each generation to ancestors whose wisdom predated recorded history. Protection of these objects was paramount. The Merovingians employed multiple layers of security: hidden chambers, subterranean vaults, coded manuscripts, trusted custodians, and even decoys. Objects might be concealed beneath altars, within sacred architectural niches, or inside everyday items to avoid detection. Certain relics were transported only during specific celestial events, guided by coded markers that indicated when it was safe to move them. Even those entrusted with their care were often limited in what they could know, creating redundancy and security across multiple layers of guardianship. The dynasty's meticulous attention to detail ensured that these objects could survive centuries, even amidst warfare, political intrigue, or betrayal. The rituals surrounding these sacred artifacts were complex and emotionally charged. Heirs and initiates were trained to interact with objects in ways that combined reverence, precision, and symbolic understanding. Certain relics might require handling according to a precise sequence of gestures, chants, or celestial alignment. Others demanded interpretation, with inscriptions or markings that encoded genealogical knowledge, celestial observation, or esoteric instruction. The interaction was both practical and transformative, teaching heirs to internalize the knowledge and responsibility embedded in each object. Some artifacts were reputed to contain the distilled essence of Lemurian knowledge. Stories, partially obscured by legend, suggest that certain relics held advanced understanding of celestial navigation, geometry, and natural law, wisdom preserved from a civilization lost to time. These objects were treated with extraordinary care, their secrets revealed only to those fully initiated into the dynasty's esoteric practices. Handling or misuse by the uninitiated was said to carry spiritual or practical consequences, reinforcing the gravity of their stewardship. Artifacts also functioned as instruments of communication within the Merovingian network. Objects might bear symbols recognizable only to trained initiates, conveying messages, lineage information, or ritual instructions across generations and regions. Some served as keys to hidden chambers, repositories, or manuscripts, allowing access to knowledge that was otherwise inaccessible. In this way, sacred objects were living tools, bridging time, space, and the layers of secrecy that defined the dynasty's strategy for survival and influence. The emotional impact of these artifacts cannot be overstated. For heirs and initiates, interacting with them was not simply a duty. It was an encounter with the past, the cosmic order, and the responsibility of lineage. The tactile, visual, and symbolic experience reinforced memory, understanding, and reverence. The very act of touching, observing, or interpreting an artifact carried weight, cultivating a sense of purpose and connection that was both deeply personal and cosmically aligned. This emotional dimension ensured that artifacts were treated with care, respect, and an understanding of their profound significance. Ceremonial use of artifacts often included public ritual combined with hidden instruction. Some objects were displayed in ways that asserted authority and legitimacy to outsiders while simultaneously serving as teaching tools for initiates. For example, a chalice used in a public ceremony might encode genealogical information in its engravings, visible only to those trained to interpret the symbols. The public ritual asserted dynastic power, while the private instruction ensured the continuity of hidden knowledge. In this way, artifacts functioned on multiple levels, serving both visible and invisible purposes simultaneously. The Merovingians also leveraged artifacts in strategic diplomacy and alliance building. Sacred objects could be gifted, loaned, or revealed selectively to trusted allies, signaling loyalty, authority, or access to hidden knowledge. These exchanges reinforced networks of trust, creating obligations and strengthening bonds between the dynasty and other esoteric groups, religious custodians, or political partners. The objects themselves became instruments of influence, carrying significance far beyond their material form. Rival factions and enemies were acutely aware of the value of Merovingian relics. Attempts to seize or destroy artifacts were not uncommon, yet the dynasty's layered system of secrecy, guardianship, and coded transmission ensured that very few objects were lost. The consequences of losing an artifact were enormous, not only in terms of material value but in the potential exposure of encoded knowledge, ritual continuity, and lineage legitimacy. The dynasty's vigilance reflects an understanding that artifacts were more than symbols. They were lifelines connecting the present to both past and future. Some artifacts were associated with profound spiritual or cosmic power. Legends suggest that certain objects could influence celestial observation, ritual outcomes, or even the fate of rulers and dynasties. While these accounts are steeped in symbolism, they reflect the Merovingians' worldview, that sacred objects were conduits between the human and cosmic realms, carrying both knowledge and responsibility. The careful interaction with these items reinforced the heirs' understanding of their role, the weight of authority, and the interconnection between bloodline, ritual, and cosmic law. Ultimately, the sacred artifacts and relics of the Merovingians were far more than treasures. They were living embodiments of history, wisdom, and esoteric authority. They encapsulated knowledge that had survived the collapse of civilizations, the march of empires, and centuries of secrecy. By carefully guarding, interpreting, and ritualizing these objects, the dynasty ensured that its hidden knowledge persisted across generations, bridging past and future, human and cosmic, visible and hidden. Through these sacred objects, the Merovingians wove a tangible link to lost civilizations, celestial order, and ancestral memory. Each artifact carried encoded lessons, spiritual resonance, and historical continuity, forming an irreplaceable element of the dynasty's power and legacy. They were symbols, tools, and teachers simultaneously, shaping heirs, guiding ritual, and safeguarding wisdom that extended far beyond ordinary history. In the careful preservation and ritual use of these objects, the Merovingians demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of power, secrecy, and the profound responsibility of custodianship, a legacy that continues to inspire fascination and mystery even today. The Merovingians were more than kings. They were custodians of secrets, stewards of knowledge encoded in bloodline, artifacts, and ritual. Behind their political power lay a network of guardians, initiates, heirs, and trusted custodians trained to preserve wisdom across generations. Each heir was carefully prepared, not just to rule a kingdom, but to interpret manuscripts, safeguard relics, and perform rituals that connected human action to cosmic and ancestral forces. Artifacts, seemingly mundane, were in truth vessels of encoded wisdom. Chalices, ceremonial stones, and engraved objects carried instructions, cosmic patterns, and ancestral memory. Handling them demanded precision, reverence, and ethical responsibility, ensuring that only those capable of understanding could access their secrets. Similarly, manuscripts were encoded with complex ciphers, celestial observations, and ritual instructions. They were guides, tests, and repositories of knowledge designed for initiates trained in the dynasty's esoteric systems. Rituals reinforced continuity. Timed with celestial cycles and layered with symbolic meaning, ceremonies connected heirs to both past and future generations. Each gesture and chant was a living act of preservation, maintaining cosmic alignment and ethical integrity. This system of guardianship ensured the survival of the dynasty's legacy. The Merovingians understood that secrecy, discipline, and ethical stewardship were more powerful than armies or wealth. Through their careful preparation of heirs, the protection of artifacts, and encoded instruction in manuscripts, they created a living network that preserved knowledge against betrayal, curiosity, or the erosion of time. Their story reminds us that true legacy is not in conquest but in responsible preservation of wisdom across generations. The Merovingian dynasty thrived not only through kingship but through carefully orchestrated conspiracies, designed to protect lineage and preserve sacred knowledge. Rival factions, political adversaries, and even religious authorities posed constant threats. Yet the dynasty developed layers of secrecy, misdirection, and coded communication that ensured survival. Manuscripts contained false leads alongside genuine instructions, while artifacts were hidden or encoded to prevent misuse. Bloodline continuity was central to these conspiracies. Marriages, alliances, and succession were carefully managed to preserve the sacred heritage and maintain access to encoded knowledge. Every political decision was intertwined with hidden strategy, ensuring that the dynasty's secrets were safeguarded even in turbulent times. Initiates and heirs were trained to navigate this web of secrecy. They learned to recognize false leads, interpret encoded manuscripts, and maintain the rituals that protected lineage and wisdom. This interplay of concealment and revelation created a living system of knowledge, where only those capable of understanding the inner workings could wield the dynasty's true power. The emotional stakes were high. Betrayal, curiosity, and ambition threatened not just authority, but the very survival of sacred knowledge. The dynasty's conspiracies were not merely strategic. They were ethical measures, ensuring that wisdom and responsibility were transmitted only to those worthy of stewardship. Through these conspiracies, the Merovingians created a model of continuity and resilience. They demonstrate that power and secrecy, when combined with foresight and ethical discipline, can preserve knowledge and influence far beyond the reach of armies or empires. Their story is a testament to the extraordinary lengths a civilization can take to protect its legacy. Even after the visible reign of the Merovingians ended, their influence persisted, hidden in shadows and woven into the fabric of history in ways few could perceive. Their legacy was not measured in the lands they controlled, the battles they won, or the palaces they built, but in the careful preservation of knowledge, the stewardship of sacred artifacts, and the ethical responsibility instilled in successive generations. These hidden currents of power, encoded in bloodline, manuscripts, relics, and ritual, ensured that the dynasty's influence endured long after the last king's crown had faded from sight. Artifacts formed the tangible backbone of this enduring legacy. Every chalice, engraved stone, ceremonial garment, or sacred vessel carried meaning far beyond its physical form. They were vessels of encoded knowledge, cosmic alignment, and ancestral memory. A simple chalice might hold ritual instructions or astronomical information. A carved stone could encode lineage secrets or serve as a key to a hidden chamber. These objects were meticulously protected, relocated, and concealed over centuries, with each move designed to safeguard not only their physical integrity, but also the sacred knowledge they carried. Their very existence created a silent network of continuity that connected past, present, and future, making them far more than relics. They were living embodiments of the dynasty's wisdom. Manuscripts, written in layered ciphers and cryptic symbols, formed another critical element of the Merovingians' hidden system. These texts were not meant for casual reading. They were interactive guides, teaching initiates about cosmic alignment, ritual practice, and the complex web of ancestry and influence that underpinned the dynasty. Each manuscript was both a map and a test. Only those trained to interpret its encoded wisdom could access its full meaning. By carefully controlling who could read, study, and apply this knowledge, the dynasty ensured that its secrets would not be lost to curiosity or malice. The manuscripts became a bridge across generations, transmitting knowledge, ethics, and ritual practice in a controlled, intentional manner. Rituals further reinforced this hidden continuity. Timed with celestial events, executed with precise gestures and chants, ceremonies were living acts that connected human action to the cosmic order. They were more than spiritual exercises, they were practical methods of safeguarding knowledge. Each ritual was a rehearsal in continuity, a living demonstration of ethical and cosmic alignment, ensuring that initiates and heirs internalized not only the content of the dynasty's secrets but also the responsibility to preserve and transmit them with care. The dynasty's hidden system required discipline, foresight, and vigilance. Betrayal, ambition, or simple negligence could endanger centuries of accumulated wisdom. Yet through the careful training of heirs, the strategic concealment of artifacts, and the encoding of manuscripts, the Merovingians created a resilient network capable of surviving political upheaval, war, and the passage of time. Their hidden influence rippled quietly across Europe, shaping decisions, alliances, and knowledge in ways that would remain invisible to most historians. This hidden legacy emphasizes a profound truth. Influence and power are not always visible. True power lies not in domination or conquest, but in the careful stewardship of knowledge and wisdom, in the ethical transmission of secrets, and in the capacity to protect what is fragile yet essential. The Merovingians' artifacts, manuscripts, and rituals were more than historical curiosities. They were instruments of continuity, embedding cosmic, ancestral, and ethical knowledge into human history. The dynasty's story challenges the way we understand history itself. What survives in shadow, encoded in objects, texts, and rituals, often carries far more significance than what is recorded in chronicles. The Merovingians teach us that history is alive in its hidden currents, shaped by those who preserve, interpret, and transmit knowledge responsibly. Even today, fragments of manuscripts, hidden relics, and echoes of ritual practice invite discovery, offering glimpses of a civilization that understood the extraordinary lengths required to safeguard its secrets. In the end, the Merovingians' hidden legacy is a testament to the resilience of knowledge, the importance of ethical stewardship, and the enduring power of wisdom preserved in shadow. Their artifacts, manuscripts, and rituals remain a silent network connecting generations, whispering a timeless lesson. True influence is not always visible, but it endures when protected, understood, and transmitted with care. The dynasty's story reminds us that history is more than the sum of its visible events. It is also the careful, deliberate, and ethical preservation of knowledge, culture, and cosmic insight across generations. The Merovingian bloodline was more than royalty. It was a vessel for hidden knowledge, a living link between past civilizations and the present. Every heir carried responsibility not only to govern but to protect the sacred legacy encoded in manuscripts, artifacts, and rituals. This knowledge was both power and burden, guiding decisions, alliances, and ceremonies, and demanding discipline, insight, and ethical awareness. Artifacts, the chalices, stones, and ceremonial objects, were not mere symbols but repositories of wisdom, carefully guarded and interpreted. Manuscripts, written in coded scripts and layered symbolism, encoded the secrets of cosmic alignment, sacred rituals, and lineage continuity. Initiates trained in these traditions became living custodians, tasked with ensuring the survival of knowledge across generations. Rituals tied human action to cosmic cycles, embedding the dynasty's wisdom into embodied practice. Even subtle gestures, chants, and timings were designed to reinforce continuity, connecting heirs to ancestral memory and celestial forces. In this light, the Merovingians' power was not temporal alone. It was ethical, spiritual, and eternal. The revelation is profound. Their true legacy lies not in conquest or territory, but in the meticulous stewardship of knowledge and the moral responsibility it demanded. Betrayal, curiosity, and ambition were constant threats, yet the dynasty's layered secrecy, encoded artifacts, and disciplined heirs ensured survival. The Merovingians teach us that history is not merely what we see. It is also what is carefully protected, transmitted, and honored.